Romantic Tales. Chapter 551. When Emo Shuyao came out of the Murong family, Yili finally breathed a sigh of relief. The two left the Murong family. On the way, Emo Shuyao's brows were tightly knitted. He was obviously troubled. "Shuyao, what happened?" Yili asked softly. Emo Shuyao frowned and told her what he heard in the Murong family. He didn't hear much because he was afraid of Murong Xiong and didn't dare to get too close. But Murong Xiong's words, "You are Lin Yuan," were heard clearly. Perhaps Murong Xiong was conceited that his martial arts were unparalleled in the world, so he didn't suppress his voice. Yili was also surprised by this result. Ren Qining is a descendant of the previous dynasty's imperial family. Could it be that he and Tanjiji are brothers? The two of them were close in age. The previous dynasty had been destroyed for 200 years. It would be strange if two orphans of the previous dynasty suddenly appeared at the same time. Emo Shuyao shook his head. No, if they were brothers they wouldn't both be called Lin Yuan. In addition, when Ren Qining talked about Tanjiji, his tone was full of disdain. If they were biological brothers, even if they were dissatisfied, they wouldn't use that kind of tone. Ren Qining's attitude was clearly degrading Tanjiji to the point that he was worse than a servant. It seems that we need to investigate this previous dynasty's imperial family. Yili smiled. Emo Shuyao nodded in agreement. Let's go. We'll go back and tell your big brother about this. After hearing the news brought by Emo Shuyao and Yili, young Master Qing Chen didn't panic. Seeing young Master Qing Chen's calm appearance, Prince Ding suddenly felt that he was meddling in other people's business. Yili looked at Su Qingchen worriedly. Big brother. Su Qingchen smiled. Don't worry. Ren Qining can't affect the overall situation. Emo Shuyao hugged Yili and rested his chin on her shoulder. He smiled. Ren Qining is full of confidence. Young Master Qingchen is unwilling to marry Miss Murong, but isn't there a descendant of the royal family who is willing to marry her? Su Qingchen casually knocked on the edge of the table, the smile on her lips like a tranquil pear blossom. Does Ren Qining have the ability to directly face the threat of Xiling Dechu State and Yanwang Chamber of Commerce? Emo Shuyao raised his eyebrows, clearly wanting to go against him. What if he does? Su Qingchen raised his eyelids and said indifferently, if he has the ability he can just raise the banner of reviving the country. Why must you marry Murong Mingyan? Emo Shuyao rubbed his nose helplessly. It was so boring talking to smart people. What do you think he'll do? Su Qingchen said, move the Murong family's businesses as soon as possible. Save as many as you can. Yili said, will Murong Xiong accept this result? Murong Xiong's temperament seemed to be that of an old man's. How could he accept this result? No matter what opinions Emo Shuyao had about the Dechu state, or even if the Dechu state immediately changed dynasties, it had nothing to do with him. However, the prerequisite was that the people changing dynasties were from the Central Plains. Generations of education had ingrained in people's bones a rejection of the other races beyond the Great Wall. As the saying went, those who were not of the same race were bound to have different hearts. If the people of the Central Plains were to become the emperor, the people would happily live their own lives. However, if it was a different race, it would be completely different. Yili gently patted Emo Shuyao's arm. Emo Shuyao's gloomy expression gradually eased. He looked at Su Qingchen and smiled apologetically. I forgot myself. Brother Su, please don't take offense. Su Qingchen smiled faintly. Prince, you're exaggerating. I'm not too happy either. Su Qingchen had received traditional education from a young age. He was even more repulsed by the other races than Emo Shuyao. As a result, the Su family never intermarried with other races. Even when he was friends with Princess Anxi, Su Qingchen never hesitated when it was time to act. Should we inform the Dechu state about this? Su Qingchen looked at Emo Shuyao and asked hesitantly. Emo Shuyao snorted softly. Send someone to inform that idiot Emo Jingqi. Whether he believes it or not is none of I's business. Su Qingchen nodded in agreement. Since young Master Ren is so confident, I'd like to see how fast he can act. Someone inform Crown Prince Genom of Gojoseon and Pavilion Master Ling that we'll act tomorrow. Su Qingchen smiled coldly. Yes, sir. Once they shed all pretense of cordiality and acted, they would naturally act very quickly. Genom of Gojoseon's order to seal up all the shops of the Murong family in West Hill. Originally, Genom of Gojoseon did not agree to it. In this way, the West Hills economy and people's livelihood would inevitably be greatly affected. However, young Master Qingchen said with a smile, "So your highness wants to see Renqining empty the entire Murong family before taking action?" Genom of Gojoseon had no choice but to accept young Master Qingchen's suggestion to act in advance. If Renqining was really a descendant of the previous dynasty, the Dechu state and the Prince Ding mansion would not be the only ones who had a grudge against Renqining. Back when the previous dynasty destroyed West Hill, they also had a hand in it. Chapter 552. Su Qingchen. Outside the Murong family's gate, Murong Xiong and Master Murong stared at the fairy-like man in front of them. Murong Mingyan's eyes were filled with hidden bitterness. Su Qingchen smiled gently and politely. He looked at the people in front of him and cupped his hands. Senior Murong, Master Ren. Renqining's face was gloomy. He had secretly made a lot of arrangements these days, but he didn't expect Su Qingchen to act so quickly. He glanced at Jack Hennam of Gojoseon and Ling Taihan standing next to Su Qingchen and smiled. Master Qingchen is indeed extraordinary. I heard that Pavilion Master Ling and Jack Hennam of Gojoseon have some grudges. I didn't expect them to stand together today. Must be because of Master Qingchen? Su Qingchen smiled and said, "The world is bustling for profit and the world is bustling for profit. Masterin, you must be joking." Su Qingchen was very straightforward. It was clear that they had their eyes on the Murong family's wealth. "What are you going to do?" Master Murong stepped forward and pointed at Su Qingchen. "Master Qingchen, the Murong family has treated you well. Aren't you afraid of being punished by the heavens for doing this?" Su Qingchen sighed helplessly. "Master Murong, please forgive me. Although I have a deep relationship with the Prince Ding mansion, there is no reason for me to sell my body for the Prince Ding mansion. However, if the Northwest is in trouble because of this, it is my fault. I have no choice. I hope Master Murong can forgive me." Master Murong was so angry that his chest heaved up and down. He looked like he was about to vomit blood. Ling Taihan and Lei Tingfeng couldn't help but lower their heads and laugh. They all knew the cause and effect of the matter. Su Qingchen's words were very gentle and pleasant to the ears, but in the ears of Ling Taihan and Lei Tingfeng it was, "I don't want to marry your granddaughter, but you insist that I marry her. If I don't marry you, I will stop the Northwest's business. I have no choice but to destroy your Murong family. How dare you?" Murong Xiong roared and flew towards Su Qingchen, who was standing at the front. This time, Murong Xiong was originally full of confidence when he returned to Jianghu. With his reputation and martial arts, he should have been respected and obeyed by everyone. To be able to catch his eye and marry into the Murong family was naturally a great favor and charity, but he did not expect to meet Su Qingchen, who did not know how to appreciate favors. Now, not only had the marriage failed, even the Murong family was in imminent danger. Ling Taihan and Genom of Gojoseon's expressions changed. They both stepped in front of Su Qingchen and struck out with their palms. The shadow guard behind Su Qingchen had already pulled Su Qingchen back a dozen steps. The palms of the three people collided and strong winds immediately spread out. The people standing around couldn't take it anymore and retreated. Ling Taihan and Genom of Gojoseon each took 2 steps back and looked at Murong Xiong, who had fallen to the ground. Ling Taihan sneered, "Senior Murong's name has been known for decades. Is it considered skill to attack someone who doesn't know martial arts? The title of the world's #1 expert isn't just an empty title, is it? How dare you?" Murong Xiong roared and did not hesitate to strike out at Ling Taihan. Ling Taihan did not know that his words had poked at Murong Xiong's sore spot. Although he had won the title of the world's #1 expert, he did not have the slightest confidence in defeating Renqining's grandfather, Lin Fuqin. It was just that Lin Fuqin did not fight with him and did not compete with him. Now that he heard Ling Taihan's words, it was as if he knew the truth of the past and could mock him. In fact, Murong Xiong was thinking too much. Even if Ling Taihan was ranked as one of the world's top 4 experts, he knew that there would always be someone stronger than him. In this Jianghu there might not be no one stronger than him. The world's #1 expert was not to be trifled with. Even if Ling Taihan's martial arts had improved after his fight with Mo Xiuyao a few days ago, he still had no chance of winning against Murong Xiong. Compared to Ling Taihan, who was being watched closely by Murong Xiong, Genom of Gojoseon was much more relaxed. He even had the time to ponder over Ling Taihan and Murong Xiong's martial arts moves. Lung Luiyue and sickly scholar who were watching from the side, saw that Ling Taihan was in a tough battle and could not help but feel anxious. Lung Luiyue raised her sword and wanted to rush up to help. Su Qingchen, who was standing beside her, stopped her. Pavilion Masterling, it's useless for you to go up now. In this kind of battle between experts, if one was not an expert of the same level, one would only be cannon fodder. Glancing at Genom of Gojoseon who was watching from the side, Su Qingchen said in a clear voice, Prince, can you defeat Senior Murong by yourself? Genom of Gojoseon was startled and his heart trembled. Only then did he rush up and join the battle between Ling Taihan and Murong Xiong. That's right, he had a grudge with Ling Taihan. If he could let Murong Xiong kill Ling Taihan and then kill Su Qingchen, that would be the best. But unfortunately, once Ling Taihan died, he would become Murong Xiong's next opponent. Since that was the case, he might as well get rid of the biggest threat first. The grudge between him and Ling Taihan wasn't something that happened in just 1 or 2 years. Wasn't everyone still living peacefully? With Genom of Gojoseon joining the battle, Ling Taihan immediately let out a sigh of relief. The two of them working together to fight Murong Xiong was considered to be evenly matched. On the side, Ren Qining's expression was gloomy. If they fought face to face, they would be at a disadvantage. Su Qingchen looked at the situation in front of him and frowned. With a wave of his hand, 4 black shadows rushed over and surrounded Ren Qining. Lung Luiyue took the opportunity to retreat from the battle. Once these 4 people joined in, the situation immediately turned around. In terms of martial arts, none of them could compare to Ren Qining. In fact, they couldn't even compare to Lung Luiyue. However, when they attacked at the same time, their attacks were direct and without any fancy moves. They coordinated perfectly as if they had practiced thousands of times. It immediately made Ren Qining a little flustered. Lung Luiyue coughed lightly and wiped away the blood on her lips. She praised, Prince Ding Mansion's Qi Lin really lives up to his reputation. Lung Luiyue had also dealt with the Prince Ding Mansion's shadow guard before. Naturally, she could see that these 4 people were completely different from the shadow guard. She casually thought about it and figured out the identity of these people. Su Qingchen was also very satisfied. He was right. If they could take down Mu Qingtsong, one of the 4 masters in the world, it wouldn't be difficult to take down Ren Qining. Ren Qining's side couldn't be finished in a short time. Everyone's eyes turned to Murong Xiong's side. Lung Luiyue and sickly scholar had seen the fight between Ling Taihan and Mo Shuyao a few days ago. Looking at the 3 people fighting in front of them, it wasn't as exciting as the fight between Ling Taihan and Mo Shuyao that day. Although they couldn't see the moves clearly, they could clearly feel the sword qi and fighting spirit. However, the 3 people in front of them didn't move quickly. At least they could see it clearly. Their moves weren't exquisite, but when they fought, their palms hit the flesh. Their sword qi was everywhere. This was a fighting style that wanted to kill people. Ling Taihan and Genom of Gojoseon had a knot in their hearts. Therefore, the 2 of them didn't have good teamwork. With Murong Xiong's rich experience, how could he not see it? He found an opportunity to take advantage of a loophole. First, he sent Ling Taihan flying with 1 palm. Then he focused on dealing with Genom of Gojoseon. Genom of Gojoseon couldn't last more than 1 or 200 moves before he was defeated. Murong Xiong looked coldly at Ling Taihan and Genom of Gojoseon, one sitting and one standing, both injured. He sneered, 2 juniors want to compete with your father? Ling Taihan looked at him coldly. Their injuries weren't light, but Murong Xiong wasn't unharmed either. It was just that his injuries weren't heavy compared to theirs. Murong Xiong didn't care about Ren Qining's side. Instead, he looked at Su Qingchen and sneered, Surname Su, what do you think now? You want to rely on these 2 brats to destroy my Murong family? You're being too whimsical. Su Qingchen wasn't in a hurry. He smiled faintly and said, Senior's martial arts are indeed superior to my expectations. But, Senior, do you think that the Murong family can still survive? Can the Murong family be stronger than Genom of Gojoseon's 3,000 gold-clad guards or Shiling's million-strong army? Murong Xiong's expression changed. Before the gold-clad guards and the million-strong army arrive, all of you will die. Ling Taihan smiled and said, I wonder who will die. Senior Murong, you're old and should cultivate your character. You're meddling in other people's business. Murong Xiong stared at Ling Taihan and sneered. Genom of Gojoseon looked at Ling Taihan and then at Su Qingchen thoughtfully. Murong Xiong raised his head and laughed. He pointed at Su Qingchen and said, I'd like to see how the world-famous Mr. Qingshan will save his own life. Murong Xiong took a step forward and easily avoided Ling Taihan and Genom of Gojoseon. He then pounced towards Su Qingshan. No matter what, Su Qingshan would not be able to dodge this attack. Not to mention Su Qingshan, even the shadow guards in front of Su Qingshan, including Lung Luiyue and the others, found it difficult to even move their bodies under this overwhelming pressure. Ling Taihan's expression changed. Qingshan. A white figure shot out from behind like a startled swan. A ray of sword light instantly pierced through the sky. The biting cold sword chi seemed to have materialized as it slashed down from the sky. Lung Luiyue and the rest immediately felt their bodies lighten as they hurriedly retreated. Su Qingshan was also brought further away by the two secret guards. Where Su Qingshan had been standing was now a tall and straight white figure. His hair was as white as snow and the sword in his hand was also shining with a cold light. Moshio. Chapter 553. Murong Xiong was shocked and angry. Although he had never seen Emo Shuyao before, he knew that Prince Ding had a head of white hair. Moreover, there were only a handful of people in the world who could block his full-strength attack. Other than Prince Ding, Emo Shuyao could not possibly be this white-haired man. Genom of Gojoseon looked at the white-clothed man standing in front of him with a complicated expression. However, he had to admit that Emo Shuyao's sudden appearance made him secretly relieved. He turned to look at Su Qingshan and said, "Young Master Qingshan, you have a good plan." To be able to arrive so coincidentally, Emo Shuyao definitely did not just arrive in city. However, he did not appear in front of everyone. Clearly, he was a hidden card left behind by Su Qingshan. No wonder Su Qingshan dared to provoke the #1 expert in the world despite his lack of strength. Su Qingshan smiled faintly and did not reply. Genom of Gojoseon saw this and turned to Emo Shuyao. "Prince Ding is quite timely. Wouldn't it have been better if he had arrived a little later and caused both sides to suffer?" Emo Shuyao said indifferently, "Just now there were over 100 experts coming this way. It took some time and we were almost late. I'm very sorry." Only then did everyone notice that Emo Shuyao's white clothes were stained with blood. The blood had not turned black yet. It was obvious that it had been stained not long ago. Rin Qining, who was still fighting with 4 Qilin guards, heard Emo Shuyao's words and her expression changed. Her arm was almost cut off. "It's good that you're here." Ling Taihan stood up and said. Su Qingshan frowned. "Many people came?" He knew that Rin Qining must have other plans. That was why he asked Emo Shuyao to cut off the road to the Murong family. A few hundred guards were still manageable. However, for Emo Shuyao to call them experts, they must not be simple. Emo Shuyao smiled and said, "Don't worry. Li Li and Emo Jingli are handling it. I came over first to take a look. Young Master Rin, why don't you stop?" Rin Qining frowned and flew out of the battle circle. Just now he knew that although these people looked ordinary, they were very difficult to deal with. If he had Murong Xiong's ability to kill in one hit, he wouldn't have to worry. But if he didn't, he could only be entangled by them and slowly exhaust his internal energy until he was defeated. As soon as he retreated, the 4 Qilin did not chase after him. Instead, they all retreated to Su Qingshan's side and protected her. Rin Qining looked around and said with a bitter smile, "This one has eyes but cannot see. I have met many times and did not recognize Prince Ding and Wang Fei. This defeat is not undeserved." These words confirmed that Emo Shuyao had indeed arrived in city a long time ago. Emo Shuyao smiled without any sincerity and nodded slightly. "I originally just wanted to walk around and join in the fun. I didn't expect young Master Rin to make I feel so surprised and could only stay for a few more days. Isn't today's matter a coincidence? So, if you didn't act smart and send people to follow me, I would have left long ago. So today's defeat is also because you asked for it." Rin Qining understood the meaning behind Emo Shuyao's words and his face became even uglier. "You're Prince Ding?" Murong Xiong stared at Emo Shuyao and asked in a low voice. Emo Shuyao raised his head and said proudly, "That is I." Murong Xiong could be considered a figure in Jianghu, but the Prince Ding mansion had never lacked geniuses. Every generation of Prince Ding was a stunning figure. How could Emo Shuyao pay attention to someone like Murong Xiong who didn't know anything other than martial arts? Murong Xiong sneered, "What a good Prince Ding. This old man wants to see what kind of ability you have." The sword in Emo Shuyao's hand trembled and he smiled faintly. "Why don't you try? Pavilion Masterling, can you still move? While they were talking, Ling Taihan and Genom of Gojoseon took the opportunity to adjust their breathing. Hearing Mo Xiaoyao's words, they immediately moved their feet. The three of them formed a triangle around Murong Xiong. At this time, no one wanted to overestimate themselves and fight Murong Xiong one-on-one. Moreover, apart from Ling Taihan, the other two weren't people of Jianghu. Naturally, they couldn't be expected to follow the rules of Jianghu. Killing the opponent was the most important thing. Ren Qining suddenly intervened and stood in front of Genom of Gojoseon. He smiled and said, "The three of you, it's fine if it's 2 against 1, but 3 against 1 is unsightly. Why don't I experience a few moves from Genom of Gojoseon?" Mo Xiaoyao smiled, "Young Master Ren, please do as you wish." After saying this, he didn't pay attention to the others and waved his sword. A biting cold light flashed towards Murong Xiong. Ling Taihan didn't hold back either. He waved his sword and sword chi surged. The two of them worked together much better than Genom of Gojoseon. Even Murong Xiong wasn't as relaxed as he was. On the other side, Ren Qining naturally began to fight with Genom of Gojoseon. On the road to the Murong clan, there was also a bloody and chaotic battle. One side of the battle wore the clothes of ordinary people and used all kinds of weapons. However, each of them had extraordinary skills. On the other side, Mo Jingli's bodyguards were faintly unable to stop them. Mo Jingli swung his sword and killed an enemy. He felt a strong wind coming from behind his head and hurriedly wanted to dodge, but it was too late. Just as he saw a long sword stabbing towards his chest, a white shadow flitted past. The sword that was hurriedly stabbing towards his chest paused. Mo Jingli quickly dodged, and when he turned back he saw that the person had fallen to the ground. Not far away, the plain-clothed woman was graceful, but her methods were swift and fierce. Her moves were simple and clear. In the blink of an eye, there were 3 or 4 corpses lying in front of her. Mo Jingli was stunned. He looked at Yi Li with a complicated expression. Yi Li slashed a person's neck with her sword. When she turned around, she saw Mo Jingli standing behind her and looking at her in a daze. She couldn't help but frown and say, "Your Highness Prince Li, how can you be distracted even on the battlefield?" Only then did Mo Jingli come back to his senses. He looked at Yi Li strangely and said, "How can you be like this?" Yi Li was speechless and rolled her eyes at the sky. She couldn't understand what Mo Jingli wanted to say. She turned around and the dagger in her hand flashed coldly. She cut off an enemy's wrist, but Mo Jingli pulled her back again. Yi Li frowned. She looked angrily at Mo Jingli and said angrily, "What do you want to do?" On the side, the shadow guard and Qi Lin of the Prince Ding mansion saw their Wang Fei being held back by Prince Li and approached Yi Li with interest. They separated the enemies around the two. Yi Li saw the situation and took a deep breath. She pushed aside Mo Jingli's hand and said in a deep voice, "Prince Li, if you have something to say, can't you wait until after this is over?" Mo Jingli looked at her and was silent inside. "When this is over, can I find you to talk to?" Mo Jingli had never thought that he, as a prince, needed to charge into battle like a normal soldier. So when his subordinates were still fighting, he didn't feel any shame in standing here and gossiping. Mo Jingli stared at Yi Li and said, "You never told me that you were so skilled." Yi Li heard the hidden condemnation and rolled her eyes. She really had enough of Mo Jingli's old words. It was as though every time they met he would bring up the same topic. It was as though she had wronged him. "What does my skills have to do with you, Prince?" During the time the two were facing off, the people of the Prince Ding mansion and Prince Li worked together to finish off their opponents. Yi Li was too lazy to pay attention to Mo Jingli, who was going crazy. She turned and headed back to the Murong family. Chapter 554. Before she could turn around, she saw a group of people approaching. Yi Li couldn't help but frown. Ren Qining couldn't have hidden so many people near An City without anyone noticing. Mo Jingli glanced at them and said, "It's Imperial Brother." It was indeed Mo Jingqi and his group of highly skilled guards. Yi Li frowned. They didn't bring many people with them this time, so they chose to work with Mo Jingli to intercept Ren Qining's people. Of course, this was because Mo Jingli had taken advantage of many of the Murong family's businesses in Dechu State. On the other hand, although Mo Jingli wasn't a reliable person, Yi Li still felt that this person had a bottom line compared to the sometimes calm and sometimes crazy Mo Jingqi. She didn't expect that Mo Jingqi, who cherished his life so much, didn't leave when An city was obviously in chaos. Instead he brought people to the Murong family. What is he doing here now? Emojingli laughed coldly. What else can I do? Naturally he's here to loot a burning house. Yili smiled coldly. Loot a burning house? Who can he rob? As they spoke, Emojingchi had already walked in with his people. When he saw Emojingli, his originally smiling face became gloomy and distorted when he saw Yili. Princess Ding? Why are you here? Yili smiled faintly. An city is Shiling's territory. The people of Shiling have never said that they don't want me here. Why can't I be here? Emojingchi's eyes were probing. Since Princess Ding is here, then Prince Ding is naturally here too? Yili smiled and said, does Emperor Tu want to have tea with our prince? Emojingchi looked at Yili and the guards beside her. His eyes flashed and he turned to Emojingli and asked, why is Imperial Brother here? Emojingli solemnly said, I came to join in the fun and happened to run into Princess Ding. Isn't Imperial Brother here as well? Emojingchi said, is that so? From his tone, it was clear that he did not believe Emojingli's explanation. Emojingli knew that Emojingchi was suspecting that he might be in cahoots with Emo Xiuyao. He didn't explain, nodding and saying seriously, yes. I have to go to the Murong family first. If Prince Li and Emperor Chu still have things to say, I will take my leave first. Yili smiled faintly. Emojingli said, I also have to go to the Murong family. Let's go to Ba together. Imperial Brother. Emojingchi said in a low voice, of course I have to go and take a look. As he said this, his gaze kept lingering on Yili. Yili didn't care and walked casually beside Emojingli. She didn't care about Emojingchi's expression and talked with Emojingli as they walked towards the Murong family. Emojingchi walked alone on the other side. His gaze sweeping over the two of them was dark and cold, causing them to tremble in fear. Yili glanced indifferently at Emojingchi, who was staring at her from time to time. She obviously knew what Emojingchi was thinking. He was thinking about whether or not he could use her to threaten Emo Xiuyao. Unfortunately, she wouldn't give him the chance. She glanced at Emojingli, who was only a step away from her. If Emojingchi wanted to make a move, Emojingli and his bodyguards would become her best shields. Furthermore, with Emojingchi's personality, he wouldn't dare to make a move before he knew which side Emojingli was on. When they arrived at the Murong family, the large-scale battle had already ended. In the open space in front of the Murong family's gate, only Emo Xiuyao and a few others were fighting fiercely. Powerful sword chi and palm chi flew in all directions, smashing the surrounding trees and even the eaves. It was a complete mess. Big brother. Yili walked to Su Qingchen's side and said softly. Su Qingchen glanced at Emojingli and Emojingchi, who were following behind Yili, then looked at the blood that had accidentally splattered on her body. He couldn't help but sigh. After carefully sizing up Yili, he asked softly, is Li injured? Yili shook her head and said, Big brother, don't worry. Li isn't injured. How long have they been fighting? Su Qingchen muttered to himself for a moment, then frowned and said, it's been 2 hours. Yili said, Xiuyao has also met Murong Xiong before. Since he said that he and Pavilion Master Ling can deal with Murong Xiong together, there shouldn't be any problems. However, we have to prevent Genom of Gojoseon from taking advantage of the situation after the battle. Su Qingchen nodded and smiled, I also have the same thoughts. So, let Genom of Gojoseon and Ren Qining fight for a while longer. Genom of Gojoseon had already been injured when he fought with Murong Xiong before, and his injuries were even more serious than Ling Taihan's. If he fought with Ren Qining again, his vitality would be greatly damaged and he wouldn't have the energy to do anything else. Therefore, Su Qingchen watched the battle for a long time and didn't have the slightest intention of asking Qilin to help Genom of Gojoseon. Emo Xiuyao still couldn't see it, but the battle between Ren Qining and Genom of Gojoseon was about to end. As Su Qingchen and Yili spoke, the two of them simultaneously sent out a palm strike with all their strength. Then they both retreated 7 or 8 steps before stabilizing their bodies. Ren Qining's face was pale. He furrowed his brows and finally spat out a mouthful of blood. Even though Genom of Gojoseon didn't spit out blood, there was a trickle of blood at the corner of his lips and his body swayed. Lei Tingfeng hurriedly went forward to support him. Ren Qining and Genom of Gojoseon were almost 20 years apart in age. Even though Genom of Gojoseon was injured first, It was enough for Ren Qining to be proud that the two of them were able to fight to a draw. Fuang, how are you? Lei Tingfeng supported Genom of Gojoseon and asked with concern. When the two swords stabbed towards him, Murong Xiong already felt a trace of fatigue. However, he wasn't willing to let these two arrogant juniors go. He leaned to one side and separated his palms to attack the two of them. Mo Xiuyao and Ling Taihan clenched their teeth. Instead of retreating, they advanced and stabbed their swords towards Murong Xiong without any hesitation. Of course, Murong Xiong's two palms also landed on their bodies. The two of them were sent flying at the same time. Even their swords fell from their hands. Xiuyao. Big brother. Yi Li and Leng Luiyue exclaimed at the same time. They flew forward to support Mo Xiuyao and Ling Taihan who had fallen. They couldn't see clearly because of the fight from afar. Now they saw that Mo Xiuyao was covered in sweat. Even his silver hair was wet. Ling Taihan's face was also pale. The back of his blue robe was completely dyed dark blue. The hand that was holding the sword was also trembling slightly. Yi Li repeatedly called out, Xiuyao, Xiuyao. How are you? Mo Xiuyao took a breath and then smiled at Yi Li comfortingly. I'm fine. My sword stabbed him first. If it wasn't for the fact that Murong Xiong had lost a lot of internal energy, the two of them would have been injured even more. At least Mo Xiuyao still had the energy to provoke Ling Taihan. Last time you won. This time I won. Ling Taihan helplessly smiled. This time you won. Everyone looked at Murong Xiong who had also fallen to the ground. His injuries were much worse than Mo Xiuyao's and Ling Taihan's. Mo Xiuyao's sword had directly pierced through his chest. Ling Taihan's sword had also slashed across his waist. His entire upper body was dyed dark red with blood. Yi Li saw clearly that Mo Xiuyao's sword had directly pierced through his heart. It was already very shocking that Murong Xiong was still breathing, but it was clear that he wouldn't be able to survive. Thinking about how if Mo Xiuyao's sword hadn't pierced through Murong Xiong's heart, even if Murong Xiong was killed by Ling Taihan, his injuries would have been even worse. After that, even if Murong Xiong didn't have the strength to kill the two of them, killing one of them would be more than enough. Thinking of this, Yi Li couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. However, what Yi Li didn't know was that Mo Xiuyao and Ling Taihan had been forced to take such a risk. The two of them had indeed planned to first exhaust Murong Xiong's internal energy and then kill him. However, Murong Xiong's internal energy was more profound than theirs by nearly 50 years. Murong Xiong had consumed a lot of his internal energy, but the two of them had consumed a lot more. If they couldn't kill him in one blow, who knew who would be the one to wear out who in the end? Murong Xiong couldn't stop coughing. Blood had already spilled out of his mouth. He stared unwillingly at Mo Xiuyao and Ling Taihan and sternly said, Good. Good Prince Ding. Chapter 555. Prince Ding, Genom of Gojoseon, how do the two of you plan to obtain the Murong family's property? Faced with this sudden change, everyone couldn't help but look at each other. Genom of Gojoseon pushed away Lei Tingfeng's hand and coldly stared at Ren Qining. What does young Master Ren want to do? For the sake of the Murong family, the price and energy he spent far exceeded that of Mo Xiuyao and Su Qingchen. Therefore he couldn't tolerate the cooked duck flying away like this. Mo Xiuyao was still lying on the ground, unable to get up. He leaned his head against Yi Li's chest and lazily looked at Ren Qining. I already said that I only came to join in the fun, so I really did come to join in the fun. The matter of the Murong family's property, I don't have the final say. Murong Xiong, that old fellow is very powerful. Li, your husband's injury is very serious. Seeing his pale face but smiling at her as usual, Yi Li's heart ached. Is it very painful? Let's immediately go back and call a doctor. Although Mo Xiuyao said that he was seriously injured, other than Ling Taihan, no one really thought that he was seriously injured. Looking at the person half lying on the ground, the vigilance in their eyes became even stronger. Hearing Mo Xiuyao's words, Ren Qining raised her eyebrows and looked at Su Qingchen. She smiled and said, Then what does young Master Qingchen say? Su Qingchen looked down and indifferently smiled. The Murong family doesn't belong to the Prince Ding mansion. At most, it can be considered a windfall. Don't look at the blood flowing like a river this time. In fact, other than Mo Xiuyao receiving an unknown injury, the Prince Ding mansion didn't suffer any losses. The people who took action were either Genom of Gojoseon, Yanwang Chamber of Commerce, or Mo Jingli's men. The Prince Ding mansion did not bring many people, so the number of sacrifices was naturally limited. Moreover, even if they didn't have anything else, at least all of the Murong family's properties in the northwest and half of the Dechu state's properties had been taken over by the Prince Ding mansion. Even if they couldn't get the remaining property, the Prince Ding mansion wouldn't suffer a loss. Hearing this, Ren Qining's face darkened. He smiled faintly and said, I remember that I have never offended young Master Qing Chen or the Prince Ding mansion. Can't we part on good terms? His biggest bargaining chip now was the Murong family's wealth, but if the Prince Ding mansion wasn't interested in this, then his chance to escape. Moreover, even if young Master Qing Chen isn't interested, I wonder if Genom of Gojoseon, Pavilion Master Ling, Emperor Chu and Prince Li are also not interested? Ren Qining's gaze turned to the others. He smiled and said, speaking of which, it's a coincidence that you are a little late. The Murong family is indeed a century-old family with wealth comparable to that of a country. I'm afraid that the combined wealth of the West Hill and the Dechu state's national treasuries can't compare. As expected, the others' expressions changed slightly. Ling Taihan was still fine. He held Lung Luiyue and sickly scholar's hands and stood up. He glanced at Su Qingchen and said, whatever young Master Qingchen means, I mean it. Genom of Gojoseon, what do you say? Su Qingchen asked. Genom of Gojoseon hesitated for a moment and said, speaking of which, young Master Ren has nothing to do with the West Hill. Genom of Gojoseon's meaning was self-evident. Emo Jingqi's gaze slowly swept past Emo Xiuyao and Yi Li. He suddenly laughed and said, Genom of Gojoseon is right. Moreover, young Master Ren didn't do anything. If something happened in the West Hill, who would dare to come to the West Hill? Young Master Ren and I hit it off at first sight. Why don't we go back and have a drink together? Actually, the most talkative person present was Emo Jingqi. The others had more or less experienced a fierce battle. Only Emo Jingqi and the hundreds of experts around him hadn't fought. Looking at Emo Xiuyao, who was leaning against Yi Li, Emo Jingqi's eyes were filled with resentment, fear and unwillingness. He wasn't sure how serious Emo Xiuyao's injuries were. He also didn't dare to bet that his subordinates wouldn't be able to kill him. Therefore, he didn't dare to act rashly. If it was someone else, Emo Jingqi might have given it a try. However, the person who was injured was Emo Xiuyao. Emo Jingqi didn't dare to do so. Back then, Emo Xiuyao's injuries were so severe that many imperial physicians had said that he wouldn't live past a month. However, he managed to survive. Many people said that he wouldn't recover in his lifetime. However, in less than 10 years he was standing in front of Genom of Gojoseon again. His martial arts were even better than before. Faintly, Emo Jingqi had a strange thought in his mind. Emo Xiuyao can't be killed. Su Qingchen sighed helplessly. He glanced at Emo Jingqi, who was looking at him provocatively. The ruler of a country could provoke a strategist from Glass City and still be so arrogant. How promising. I understand the intentions of Genom of Gojoseon and Emperor Chu. Since that's the case, young Master Ren, hand over the whereabouts of the Murong family's treasures. Before you leave Xiling, the Prince Ding mansion won't make things difficult for you. In other words, once he left Xiling, things might not be the same. He nodded and smiled. Thank you for your mercy, young Master Qingchen. As long as he left Xiling, no, as long as he left in city, there would be people who would come to his aid. When that time comes, he wouldn't necessarily be afraid of the Prince Ding mansion. However, it seemed like he couldn't keep the treasures that he had obtained with great difficulty. Fortunately, he wasn't completely unprepared. Everyone present was a powerful figure. Naturally, they wouldn't go back on their word on this kind of matter. Ren Qining straightforwardly handed over the address and account book of the Murong family's treasure. The gold and silver accumulated by more than 10 generations of Murong family heads was indeed astonishing. After confirming that it was indeed the Murong family's treasure, Ren Qining didn't care about how they were going to divide it. He cleanly bid them farewell. After all, it wouldn't be his turn to divide it. Before Ren Qining left, he took with him the last surviving descendant of the Murong family, Murong Mingyan. According to the original agreement with Genom of Gojoseon, the Prince Ding mansion would get 30% of the Murong family's property, the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce would get 10%, and the rest would go to Genom of Gojoseon. Emo Jingqi only got a portion that Ren Qining specially gave him. Although he was jealous of Emo Xiuyao and Genom of Gojoseon, he still remembered that this was under someone else's roof, so he didn't say anything. As for Mo Jingli, he had another agreement with the Prince Ding mansion. Naturally, it had nothing to do with the Murong family's property. When Yi Li and the others returned to Qingyuan Inn, the entire inn was already empty. From the shopkeeper to the cleaning staff, everyone had disappeared. Yi Li and the others already knew that Qingyuan Inn was related to Ren Qining, so they weren't too surprised. For safety's sake, they all moved to the inn that Su Qingchen was temporarily staying at. Genom of Gojoseon left Lei Tingfeng to deal with the aftermath and rushed back to the Emperor of Xiling City on the same day. Mo Xiuyao's injuries really weren't light. He was forced by Yi Li to lie on the bed to recuperate and couldn't get out of bed to move. For Mo Xiuyao, lying on the bed to recuperate was more painful than killing him. However, Yi Li had been frightened by his injuries and ordered him to stay on the bed to rest. Therefore, Master Prince Ding became even more persistent in pestering Wang Fei to accompany him to recuperate. Master Qing Chen's face became uglier by the day as he worked outside. Reporting to Prince Wang Fei, Emperor Chu and Li Wang have come. The guard outside the door reported. Mo Xiuyao, who was lazily lying on the bed with his head raised as Yi Li fed him fruit, frowned and said impatiently, "What have they come for?" The guard outside stilled. How could he know why those two had come to find the prince? But this didn't affect the displeasure in his prince's tone. He hurriedly asked, "Should this subordinate invite them back?" The room was quiet for a while before Yi Li's voice came. "Invite Emperor Chu and Li Wang in." Chapter 556. The door to the room opened. Mo Jingqi and Mo Jingli entered together. Within the room, the screen separating the inner and outer rooms had already been removed. As soon as the two entered, they saw Mo Xiuyao half reclining on the bed. His white hair was casually scattered on the bed, and his white robes made him appear particularly cold and distant. Yi Li sat on the edge of the bed, casually putting down the apple she had just peeled. Nodding her head, she smiled and said, "Emperor Chu, Prince of Li, please sit." The two silently sat down. The imperial bodyguards were standing guard outside, and Yi Li was being held back by Mo Xiuyao. Naturally, they could not expect anyone to serve them tea. Fortunately, the two were not here to drink tea. Mo Xiuyao glanced at the two, asking, "What business do you have with I at this time?" Such a casual tone was nothing in Mo Jingli's ears. However, in Mo Jingqi's ears, it was completely different. When Mo Xiuyao was still in the Chu capital, he would never have used such a casual and perfunctory tone to speak to him. Even if the politeness and submission in his tone were fake, he would at least put on an act. However, right now Mo Xiuyao's tone was as if the person in front of him was not the monarch of a country, but a random cat or dog. If he was happy, he would say a few words, and if he was unhappy, he would ignore him. Seeing that Mo Jingqi was about to fly into a rage, Mo Jingli inadvertently coughed lightly and asked, "Imperial brother, don't you have something to ask Prince Ding?" Although he also found Mo Xiuyao displeasing to the eye, it had to be said that seeing his imperial brother's face darken with anger, Mo Jingqi felt rather happy. Mo Jingqi took a deep breath, suppressing the anger in his heart. Staring at Mo Xiuyao, he asked, "Where did Princess Changel go?" Mo Xiuyao looked doubtfully at Mo Jingqi. Only after quite a while did he lightly scoff. Indifferently he asked, "Princess Changel is your daughter. How would I know where she went?" Mo Jingqi sneered, "Changel went missing in the Nanzhao Palace. Who else could it be but you?" Mo Xiuyao's lips curled up, his tone mocking. "That's right. Princess Changel went missing from the Nanzhao Palace. How would I know why she went to the Nanzhao Palace? How would I know when she went to the Nanzhao Palace? Mo Jingqi, your daughter is missing and you come to ask me for her. Are you going to ask I for her one day when your dragon throne is gone?" Mo Jingqi's complexion alternated between green and white. Finally, unable to restrain himself, he slapped the table and stood up, glaring angrily at Mo Xiuyao. How could Mo Xiuyao take Mo Jingqi's anger seriously? Lying back on the soft pillow, he gazed impatiently at Yi Li. "Li, I'm hungry." Yi Li helplessly picked up an apple from the side, cutting it into small pieces and feeding it to him. Mo Xiuyao ate happily, not forgetting to share with Yi Li. "Li, eat too. The food that Lei Tingfeng sent over is not bad." Seeing the two people before him acting as if there was no one else present, Mo Jingqi was so angry that his hair stood on end, but there was nothing he could do. He could only leave in a huff. Seeing that he was about to leave, Emo Xiuyao gave him a look and said, "Wait." Emo Jingqi gritted his teeth and said, "What else do you want to say?" Emo Xiuyao looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile. After thinking for a bit, he said, "It's rare for you to specially visit I, so I'll tell you a piece of good news for free. Speaking of which, the Ren Gongzi that you met a few days ago is the current commander of the northern region, the orphan of the previous dynasty Lin Yuan." This news immediately made Emo Jingqi dizzy, unable to recover for a long time. Emo Jingli frowned and said, "If Ren Qining is Lin Yuan, then who is Tan Jiji?" Emo Xiuyao shrugged, indicating that he didn't know. Emo Jingqi laughed coldly and said, "You think I'll believe your nonsense?" Although he said this, Emo Jingqi's heart was faintly shaken. This was because he knew that Emo Xiuyao wouldn't use this kind of thing to tease him. Seeing Emo Xiuyao's slightly mocking expression, Emo Jingqi hated that he couldn't find a hole to hide in. The Tan Jiji that he trusted was a remnant of the previous dynasty, and the Ren Qining that he had just saved 2 days ago was also a remnant of the previous dynasty. If this spread out, where would he put his face as the emperor? He couldn't be bothered to argue with Emo Xiuyao anymore. Emo Jingqi's face darkened as he flicked his sleeves and left. Emo Jingli was a step slower than him, walking behind him. He hesitantly turned around to look at Emo Xiuyao and asked, "Ren Qining really?" Emo Xiuyao laughed disdainfully and said, "I don't have candy to eat if I lie to you." Emo Jingqi, that trash, didn't hear anything when someone else was tampering with the land of the Dechu state. In these few years, Ren Qining has taken over the entire northern region, and his hands have already reached the Dechu state. What is that trash doing? This is also good, lest one day I can't stand it anymore and destroy him first. You tell Emo Jingqi that when he becomes the emperor of 10,000 countries, I will send him a sword on behalf of Emperor Taizu to help him die for his country. Emo Jingli was speechless. He turned around and walked out. Outside the door, Emo Jingqi clearly heard Emo Xiuyao's words. He was so angry that his whole body was trembling, but he couldn't turn around and confront Emo Xiuyao. Emo Jingli's eyes darkened. He stepped forward and said, "Imperial brother, we should return to the capital." Emo Jingqi coldly snorted, flicked his sleeves and left. Emo Xiuyao recuperated for nearly half a month before leaving in city with Yi Li. As for the capable young master Qing Chen, he had already returned early. Before leaving, Ling Taihan also brought his 2 sworn sisters and sworn brother to say goodbye. After Pavilion Master Ling fought with Emo Xiuyao and Murong Xiong twice in a row, he seemed to have realized something and decided to go back and practice in seclusion. In city, which was originally bustling with noise and excitement, had already gradually quieted down. When Yi Li and Emo Xiuyao left, only Lei Tingfeng came to see them off. He still had to stay in city to clean up the mess left behind by the Murong clan's destruction. In comparison, although the Prince Ding mansion didn't achieve its goal, it was the most profitable. Because they didn't have to pay anything, all they got was net profit. They didn't even have to clean up the mess. The 2 of them traveled slowly. By the time they returned to the northwest, it was already the end of September, close to October. Just as they returned to Glass City, they hadn't even entered the Grand Prince Ding mansion when a white and tender little bun wearing an ink-colored brocade rushed out guiltily. Emo Xiaobao hugged Yi Li and cried earth-shatteringly, "Wu-woo, hua. Mother, your words don't count. Wu-woo, you clearly said that you would come to see Xiaobao the next day. Hua. Mother doesn't want Xiaobao anymore. Xiaobao is a child that no one wants. Boo." Yi Li couldn't help but frown. Who taught this child all these messy things? But looking at the tearful little bun, even Xiaobao, who usually hated being called the most, came out. It could be seen that he was really sad. Ever since Emo Xiaobao was born, she had always kept him by her side. This was the first time she left for such a long time. Seeing her son crying to the point of hiccups, Yi Li hurriedly lowered her head and kissed his teary little face. She said softly, "I'm sorry, mother was wrong. How can mother not want Xiaobao? Xiaobao is mother's precious darling." Being kissed by mother in front of so many people, Emo Xiaobao still felt a little embarrassed. His little face immediately turned red like an apple. But he really missed mother. In the end, Emo Xiaobao, who couldn't bear to leave mother, buried his little face in mother's shoulder. His 2 little hands tightly hugged Yi Li's neck, unwilling to let go. "Mother, Xiaobao misses mother." Yi Li looked at Emo Xiaobao's white and tender face, his big watery eyes. Her heart softened like a ball of cotton. "Mother also misses Xiaobao." Then mother won't not want Xiaobao anymore? Emo Xiaobao looked at Yili with eager eyes. Yili suddenly had no resistance. Mother will never not want Xiaobao. Mother is the best, Xiaobao loves mother. Smack. Emo Xiaobao cheerfully gave Yili a few longing kisses. The people who came to receive them saw their little Shitzi and Wang Fei talking about their longing after a long separation. At the same time they saw their prince standing at the side with a dark face. After a while, Emo Xiaobao was still grabbing his mother to talk about his longing and grievances. Emo Xiuyao couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. He bent down and lifted Emo Xiaobao from Yili's arms. Mother. Being lifted by the collar by Emo Xiuyao, Emo Xiaobao kicked his little legs in displeasure as he begged mother for help. Xiuyao. Yili looked disapprovingly at Emo Xiuyao. It wasn't good to always lift a child by the collar. What if Xiaobao was hurt? Emo Xiuyao quickly changed the way he carried Emo Xiaobao that Yili could accept. He held Emo Xiaobao in his arms and looked with a smile at his son whose eyes were darting around as he said, Son, Fuwang also misses you very much. Do you not miss Fuwang at all when you see me? Emo Xiaobao bared his teeth at him at a place where Yili couldn't see. He didn't want to hate Fuwang. It was good if Fuwang didn't come back often. Then no one would steal mother from him. But in front of Yili, Emo Xiaobao could only obediently nod his head and say, This child also misses Fuwang. Bending down he kissed Emo Xiuyao's face. Emo Xiuyao, whose face was covered in saliva, was stunned. Then looking at the little thing in his arms with a mischievous smile, Emo Xiuyao resisted the urge to throw the little thing out. He put on a fake smile and said, You really are Fuwang's good son. Xiaobao is so obedient. Xiaobao must have finished the homework that Fuwang gave you before you left, right? Emo Xiaobao's face stiffened. His eyes kept darting around, not daring to look at Emo Xiuyao. Looking at his expression, how could Emo Xiuyao not understand? He looked at him with an amiable smile. Xiaobao, it seems like you need to explain to Fuwang how much you missed your Fuwang these past few months, to the point that you forgot to do your homework. Emo Xiaobao was like a punctured balloon, slowly deflating. Fuwang and whatnot, he hated it the most. Chapter 557. Returning to the Fu, Yili didn't know whether to laugh or cry as she held the pitiful little bun and pleaded with Emo Xiuyao for him. Although Emo Xiaobao missed his mother very much, it wasn't to the point where he couldn't do anything but think about her day and night. In fact, after Emo Xiaobao left Emo Xiuyao's oppression and Mr. Qingyun doted on this great-grandson of his, it was completely different from how he was strict with Su Qingchen and the other brothers. As a result, Emo Xiaobao was so pleased with himself that he was like a wild horse that was out of control. So much so that he forgot about the homework that Mo Xiuyao had assigned to him last night before he left and said that he would check when he came back. This time, Mo Xiuyao didn't purposely make things difficult for Mo Xiaobao and gave him homework that he could complete. But the bad thing was that Mo Xiaobao was too smart. Smart people tend to be more scheming than others. So he procrastinated, and when he found out that his father was about to return, he didn't even finish a third of his homework. Alright, split it into 10 days and make up for the homework that your father gave you, understand? Yili reached out and rubbed the child's small head as she said softly. In reality, Mo Xiaobao was so young that Yili didn't feel that giving him too much homework was a good thing. But since it was given, it must be completed. She couldn't let the child develop the mentality of slacking and getting lucky. Mo Xiaobao knew that he was in the wrong and carefully raised his eyelids to look at Yili. In a soft voice he said, Mother, this child knows his mistake. Yili nodded with a smile. If you know your mistake and can change, then you're a good child. Then can this child go a few days later to accompany Taigong? Mo Xiaobao said shyly. Yili couldn't help but smile. Alright, we'll go see Taigong tomorrow and then tell Taigong that we'll go to the academy in a few days. But you can't be like this in the future. If you study with Taigong, you have to understand the principle of perseverance. You can't neglect your studies because of other things, understand? Mo Xiaobao nodded obediently. Mo Xiuyao sat at the side and looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile. If you don't know, then you don't need to study with your grandfather in the future. Father will let your uncle teach you, how about that? Mo Xiaobao's face immediately fell. Compared with his eldest uncle, who was gentle and elegant but always made him a little scared, he preferred his great-grandfather, who was kind and benevolent. Yili looked at the father and son helplessly. She could feel the unpleasing aura from a few hundred meters away. Shuyao, your injuries haven't healed yet. Rest for today. If there's anything we can talk about it tomorrow. Emo Shuyao's expression relaxed as he nodded. Emo Xiaobao's eyes brightened, blinking his big eyes at Yili. Nyangqin, Xiaobao wants to sleep with Nyangqin. Yili was about to answer, but Emo Shuyao didn't hesitate to pick up Emo Xiaobao and put him on his lap. Looking down at him, he said, "Little brat, you're almost 6 years old and you still want to sleep with Lili. Do you want to be laughed at?" Emo Xiaobao was dissatisfied, arguing with reason. "Father, you're already 30 years old. Why do you still want to sleep with Nyangqin?" Pfft. Yili finally couldn't hold back her laughter. Seeing the adult and child looking at her at the same time, she quickly waved her hand and said with a smile, "It's nothing. I still have some things to deal with in the study. You guys can slowly discuss it." Saying this, she ran away under the two's stare. "I want to sleep with Nyangqin," Emo Xiaobao said firmly. "Lili is my wife. If you want someone to accompany you, go find your wife." Emo Shuyao said, "Nyangqin is my mother. Go find your mother." Emo Xiaobao widened his big eyes. Emo Shuyao's mouth twitched, his expression fierce. "Only Nyangqin can sleep with Nyangqin. Those who sleep with Nyangqin are all cowardly and useless little brats." Emo Xiaobao was conflicted. "Where's my Nyangqin?" Emo Shuyao's expression was calm as he said calmly, "When you grow up, you can go find her yourself." Outside the door, Yili heard the two's nonsensical conversation and turned to leave with a dark expression. When Yili and Emo Shuyao returned to Glass City, all kinds of administrative matters came crashing down. Although Su Hongyu was there were still many things that required Emo Shuyao to personally deal with. The first thing that came was the large amount of news regarding Ren Qining sent from Dechu State. Yili and Emo Shuyao had already started preparing for the military exercise before they left Glass City. In the study, Emo Shuyao stared at the thick pile of documents in front of him and raised his eyebrows. The efficiency of the Prince Ding Mansion's intelligence network was very good. In less than a month, all kinds of news regarding Ren Qining had been sent to the Prince Ding Mansion's study. Looking at the information, even Emo Shuyao couldn't help but marvel at how deeply Ren Qining had hidden himself. Ren Qining looked like a youth in his 20s, but in reality he was the same age as Tan Jiji. He was already 37 or 38 years old. To a normal person this age was not considered young, but to a person who wanted to conquer the world he was still too young. This person, Fong 12, had not taken a step into the Central Plains for more than 20 years after arriving at a tribe in northern Jin. In these 20 years he had slowly gained a foothold in the northern region. He had slowly subdued the various tribes in northern Jin, essentially agreeing to the entire northern region. Without anyone, including the Prince Ding Mansion, noticing, he had quietly expanded the northern region into a place with more than 100,000 elite soldiers. To put it bluntly, even if Ren Qining could not succeed in reviving his country, his current strength was enough to make him king of the northern region. From this, it seemed that Tan Jiji, who had been jumping around happily between the Dechu State and Nanzhao, was more like a smokescreen that Ren Qining had placed in front of people. It was just unknown if this smokescreen was intentional or not. "Lung Hao, you just sent news. Mo Jingqi is preparing to move troops to the northern region," Su Hongyu said calmly. "Move troops to the northern region?" Mo Shuyao frowned and looked sideways at Lu Jingxian and the other generals sitting on the side. He asked, "Can the Chu army defeat the army of the northern region?" Lu Jingxian thought for a moment and said, "In terms of national strength and military strength, the Chu army has no reason not to be able to defeat the northern region. But in recent years, the northern region has been in chaos and various tribes have gone on expeditions. Although the northern region only has a few 100,000 troops, they can be said to be elite troops that have survived hundreds of battles. And although the Dechu state fought a war a few years ago, its record is worrying." Feng Jiao laughed coldly. "What is the point of the prince being concerned about whether or not he can win? Even if you are willing to send troops to help him pacify the northern Jin, he wouldn't dare to let the Mahist army enter the pass. He has taken most of his troops to the front line at Hong Pass." Mo Shuyao smiled in a rare good-natured manner. "I am just worried that Mo Jingqi is too useless. If the northern region army really enters, it will not be a good thing for us. If he was worried about the safety of the Dechu state, he would not have purposely provoked Mo Jingqi in An City. He only hoped that the generals under Mo Jingqi would not disappoint him too much. Su Qingchen said thoughtfully, if there are no accidents in at most 3 months, there will be battles between the north and the south. What are the prince's plans? Mo Shuyao smiled. Plans? Shouldn't we be preparing for military exercises? Xiling will fight Nanzhao and the Dechu state will fight the northern region. Let's just play with ourselves. Everyone was speechless. Playing with ourselves? Prince, you really have a good personality. Chapter 558. After discussing the matter of Renqining, the topic of conversation naturally turned to the military exercises that had been prepared for several months. Regardless of whether it was Su Hongyu and the other civil officials or Lu Jingxian and Zhang Qilon and the other military generals, this was undoubtedly an extremely novel matter. In this era, battles were fought from time to time. As a result, there were many who questioned the true significance of this so-called military exercise. However, regardless of what was said, preparations had been made for several months. Everyone was looking forward to it. Upon hearing Mo Xuyao's question, Zhang Qilon immediately replied, "Prince, please be at ease. According to the prince and princess's instructions, preparations have already been made. The location will be within a radius of 300 li with Hangzhou as the center." Mo Shuyao nodded and stated, "The area is large enough. Very good. Just make the preparations according to the previous instructions." "Then Prince, when will the time be?" Lu Jingxian asked. Mo Shuyao lazily raised his eyelids and glanced at him, asking, "Will the enemy tell you when to launch a sneak attack? Just make the preparations first." "Yes, this subordinate obeys." Princess consort Princess Changle has arrived. Yili was seated in the small study, looking at files when Zhuijing came in to report. Yili was somewhat surprised. She had just returned and already had a pile of matters to attend to. To be honest, she had somewhat forgotten about the matter of Princess Changle. Setting down her brush, Yili said, "Invite her in." Not long after, Princess Changle stepped into the study. After not seeing her for 2 months, the originally delicate and charming little princess seemed to have lost some weight. Her entire person seemed to have matured greatly. However, her originally bright eyes were now somewhat dim and sorrowful. "Greetings to Princess Ding." Princess Changle curtsied and saluted. Yili stepped forward and pulled her up. After sizing her up, she said, "The princess seems to have lost quite a bit of weight. Is it because the servants are not taking good care of you?" Princess Changle promptly shook her head and replied, "Princess Consort's words are too serious. The servants of the prince's estate treat Wuyo very well." After following Feng Zhiyao and company back to Glass City, Princess Changle abandoned her original title of princess and used the nickname given to her by the empress. Therefore, other than Feng Zhiyao, Zhuijing and a few others who followed her to Nanzhao, everyone else in the Prince Ding mansion called her Miss Wuyo. They didn't even mention the surname Mo. Seeing Princess Changle grow up so much, Yili sighed helplessly in her heart. Pulling Princess Changle to the side, she sat down and said, "It is good that you have not suffered any grievances. If there is anything that your subordinates have not handled properly, feel free to tell me. Or you can tell Steward Mo and Zhuijing. Don't make yourself suffer, understand?" Princess Changle's eyes reddened slightly. Gazing at Yili, she gratefully stated, "Everyone treats me extremely well. How could I possibly suffer any grievances? Today I came to bid farewell to Princess Consort. I want to move out." Yili stared blankly. Frowning slightly, she asked, "Why?" Princess Changle replied, "I know that everyone treats me very well. However, Wuyo is still an outsider. The Prince Ding mansion is not like any other place. Moving out gives me a bit more freedom." Smiling faintly, Yili asked, "Could it be that your uncle Prince Ding and I will restrict your freedom in this mansion?" "No, that is not what I meant." Princess Changle was somewhat at a loss. For a moment, it seemed that she did not know how to explain this to Yili. In reality, it was not that Yili did not understand her meaning. Even if she and Mo Shuyao trusted Princess Changle, in the end she was still Mo Jingqi's daughter. In addition, although there were not many people in Li City who knew Princess Changle, there were still a few. If the news that Princess Changle was living in the Prince Ding mansion were to spread, it was possible that in the future, there would be even more twists and turns. However, this 13 or 14-year-old child before her had to think of so many problems. Yili could not help but feel somewhat distressed. Perhaps understanding Yi Li's thoughts, Princess Changle revealed a bright smile. Pulling on Yi Li's hand she said, Princess Ding, I know that you are doing this for my own good. However, I have already grown up and left imperial mother and maternal grandfather. Isn't it necessary for them to feel at ease by becoming an adult? It's not like I don't have anything. Imperial mother gave me enough silver to live in luxury for the rest of my life. When they left, they also left behind 2 trusted aides of the Hua family to take care of me. Moreover, I am in the northwest. Princess Ding will definitely not allow anyone to bully me, right? Yi Li smiled. Reaching out, she stroked the little girl's hair and said, as expected, you have grown up. However, as a girl, what plans do you have for the future? Tilting her head, Princess Changle thought for a moment. Looking at Yi Li, she resolutely stated, I want to study medicine. I know that the Northwest's restrictions on women are not as severe as the Dechu states. After I have completed my studies, perhaps I can open a medical clinic to treat patients. Smiling, Yi Li raised her eyebrows and asked, Then who do you want to study medicine from? How do you want to become a disciple? You must know that nowadays, very few physicians accept young girls as their apprentices. Medicine is not something that you can learn by reading a few books. Resolutely, Princess Changle replied, I can disguise myself as a woman and become an apprentice at the medical clinic. Otherwise, I will spend money to hire a formidable physician to teach me. Imperial Mother said that so long as one wants to learn, there will always be a way to learn something. Moreover, it's not like I don't know anything. I know how to memorize herbal texts and recognize many medicinal ingredients. At the very least, I am better than someone who knows nothing. It will be easier for Master to accept me. Seeing that the young lady had truly made up her mind, Yi Li beamed at her and whispered, Seeing that you are so sincere, I'll tell you a secret. Princess Changle blinked her eyes, looking at her curiously. Yi Li softly replied, The Prince Ding mansion has 2 divine physicians. A divine physician Shen who cured Prince Ding's uncle. But I haven't seen him for so long. Princess Changle's eyes brightened, but she still asked doubtfully. Smiling, Yi Li replied, Sir Shen and Sir Lin are bored in their residences, so they moved to the city and opened a medical clinic. If you can have them teach you, you naturally won't have to worry about your medical skills. Although Princess Changle did not know who Dr. Lin was, the name of Xin Yang was known throughout the world. Hearing Yi Li's words, Princess Changle made a decision. Nodding her head, she replied, Thank you, Princess Ding. I know what to do. Raising her brows, Yi Li smiled and replied, Sir Shen and Dr. Lin may not necessarily accept you. Princess Changle resolutely replied, I will definitely do my best to beg Sir Shen to accept me. Yi Li no longer tried to persuade her. Sighing, she patted the back of Princess Changle's hand and said, Since you have already made up your mind, I will say no more. Later, I will have someone choose a suitable residence near the prince's residence. You cannot refuse this. In the end, the prince's residence is more familiar with Glass City. It will be more convenient. Princess Changle no longer refused. Her clear eyes reddened, but she still smiled and replied, Then many thanks, Princess Ding. The 2 chatted for a while before Princess Changle rose and took her leave. After sending Princess Changle off, Yi Li pondered for a while before calling for Zhuijing and asking, Has young Master Feng San treated Princess Changle well these past few days? Zhuijing stared blankly for a moment. Although he did not understand the meaning behind Princess Changle's question, he still answered truthfully, there was nothing good or bad about it. Princess Changle lived in the guest courtyard and did not often meet with young Master Feng San. Yi Li frowned slightly. Thinking for a while, she asked, Then, what about on the way back? Zhuijing replied, On the way back. Young Master Feng San did not seem too willing to get close to Princess Changle. This subordinate remembers that once again we missed the town and rested in the wilderness. Lin Han asked young Master Feng San to deliver some food to Princess Changle. In the end, young Master Feng San threw the food to me. However, young Master Feng San did not treat Princess Changle rudely. Yi Li nodded and said, I understand. Later, have Feng San come over when he is finished. This subordinate, Feng Jiao, requests an audience with Princess Changle. Less than an hour later, Feng Jiao appeared outside Yi Li's study. Hearing Yi Li's words, Feng Jiao stepped into the study. Smiling, he said, Princess Changle has summoned this subordinate so soon after returning. This subordinate feels extremely honored. What orders does Princess Changle have? Yili was disinclined to pay attention to his mischievous smile. Setting down the dossier, she picked up the teacup by her side and took a sip before indifferently stating, "Princess Changle wishes to use Princess Changle." Feng Xiao was startled. Before he could speak, he heard Yili continue, "I have already agreed." Feng Xiao frowned. Somewhat disapproving, he asked, "Why? Princess Changle is still a young girl. How will she live by herself when she moves out?" Yili smiled faintly and replied, "A young girl? Princess Changle is already 14 years old. Although the Prince Ding mansion and the imperial family of the Dechu state are of the same bloodline, they have long been separated by blood. Neither relative nor friend, how can a girl like her remain in the Prince Ding mansion?" Feng Xiao stared fixedly at Yili. It was obvious that he did not believe her reasoning. Yili did not mind. Raising her eyebrows, she smiled and said, "All right. Actually, this consort feels that young Master Feng San seems to have an opinion about Princess Changle. Since this is the case, Princess Changle is no more than an insignificant young girl, while young Master Feng San is the prince's trusted aide. This consort will naturally take care of your feelings first." Feng Xiao's complexion was somewhat unsightly. "When have I ever had an opinion about Princess Changle?" Faced with Yi Li's smile that was not a smile, Feng Xiao could only silently rub his nose. "Then Princess Changle, there is no need for you to have her move out. After all, she is still a child. I've already said that it was she who wanted to move out. A girl living under someone else's roof is unavoidably sensitive. All along the way, you have been acting strangely towards her. Can you blame her for feeling uncomfortable living in the Prince Ding mansion? You also know that she is still a child. Since this is the case, the grudges of adults have nothing to do with her. Not only you, but I'm afraid that everyone in the mansion who knows of her identity also has a knot in their hearts. Although she would not be rude, how could a girl who was as meticulous as hair not be able to detect the attitude of others towards her? It was no wonder that Princess Changle had come to say her farewells on the second day of her return. However, this could not be blamed on anyone. After all, her father was Emo Jingqi. Everyone knew that it was wrong to take their anger out on someone else. However, how many people were capable of doing so? I know that this matter is my fault. Princess Changle, please have her stay, Feng Xiao said. Yi Li shook her head and replied, Princess Changle has already decided to become an apprentice to a master and study medicine. It will be more convenient for her to live outside. The only reason I have asked you to come is to have you find a suitable residence for her, as well as take care of her outside. There are many people and matters within the Prince Ding mansion. Even if we instruct her, it is not certain that she will not be wronged. Feng Xiao was silent for a moment. He felt that Yi Li's words were reasonable. Nodding his head, he replied, This subordinate understands. Princess Changle, please be at ease. Chapter 559. At the end of the 10th month, the Dechu state officially declared war on the north. Almost at the same time, Shiling Genom of Gojoseon ordered his son, Genom of Gojoseon heir Lei Tingfeng to lead 200,000 soldiers to the border between the south and Nanzhao. For a time, all the countries began to mobilize their troops. Even the northern tribes who were in the middle of the bitter cold began to move. At this time, the military exercise that the Prince Ding mansion had been preparing for several months began. In the morning, the General Zhang Qilon, who was stationed in the camp 30 li outside of Li City, received an order. Lead the troops at full speed to Jiantianya 50 li northwest of Hangzhou, and seize the natural stronghold Jiantianya. This order came too quickly and could be said to be completely unprepared. Fortunately, the Mahist army had always been well trained. In addition, everyone's hearts had been stretched taut recently, so they did not panic this time. When he received the order, Zhang Qilon was eating dinner with a few of his subordinates and discussing the military situation. Looking at the graceful but elegant handwriting on the letter, Zhang Qilon jumped up and shouted to his subordinates, Pass down the order, break camp and depart in an hour. But he felt strange. Why did this order look like Wang Fei's handwriting? The generals all paused. The braver ones quickly asked, General, we are. Zhang Qilon chuckled and said, It's starting. Little ones, work harder. We have to beat that old guy until he cries for his father and mother. Everyone couldn't help but laugh. The atmosphere in the tent instantly relaxed. Zhang Qilon glared and roared, Hurry up and get ready. Immediately, Everyone dispersed out of the tent and went to dispatch their subordinates. After sending his subordinates away, Zhang Qilan looked at the letter in his hand again. He wiped his face and turned to prepare for his expedition. General Zhang, sorry to disturb you so late at night. Outside the tent, an elegant voice said with a faint smile. Zhang Qilan paused and then realized who had spoken. He quickly went forward. The curtain outside the tent was lifted and the person outside walked in. Zhang Qilan hurriedly cupped his hands and said, "This subordinate greets Princess." Unlike usual, Yili was wearing a long gray cloak, but her hair was combed into a man's bun. From the white hem of the cloak, it could be seen that it was a man's clothing. Zhang Qilan had some doubts but still asked, "Wang Fei, this is?" Yili smiled and said, "General Zhang is about to go to war. This one is not talented enough to recommend myself as an advisor. I hope General will not reject me." "Wang Fei is saying that she wants to march with us?" Zhang Qilan asked in surprise. Yili nodded. Zhang Qilan said with some difficulty, "This Wang Fei's body is priceless." Zhang Qilan was startled, but he quickly reacted. With over 10,000 soldiers, it was impossible for them to reach Jiantian Cliff without being discovered by Prince Ding. The worst thing was that there was a division of the Western Army that they had to pass through on their way to Jiantian Cliff. Wang Yi would definitely not allow them to reach Jiantianya so smoothly. Feng Jiao leading the Black Cloud Cavalry to open up a path in front was much better than being stopped and beaten when they reached the place. In the darkness of the night, a group of people rode their horses forward. Behind them was a long line of Mahist army soldiers. Inside the Western Army camp, Mo Shuyao was still dressed in white, his hair white like snow. He sat lazily in the large tent, looking at the map in front of him as if he was deep in thought. Lu Jingxian sat next to him and said, "Prince, Zhang Qilan can be considered to be from the Black Cloud Cavalry and has always been fast. I'm afraid that they have already left the camp." Mo Shuyao nodded and raised his eyebrows. "No matter how fast they are, they only have 10,000 Black Cloud Cavalry. If they want to rely on 10,000 Black Cloud Cavalry to snatch Jiantian Cliff from us, they must be dreaming." Lu Jingxian nodded and said with a frown, "However, although we have 50,000 Black Cloud Cavalry, our normal strength is clearly weaker than the enemy. The Black Cloud Cavalry's attacks are strong, but their defense is a bit weaker. Even if we take Jiantian Cliff first, to rely on 50,000 Black Cloud Cavalry to defend against 100,000 Mahist army's attacks will be a bit difficult." Mo Shuyao looked at Lu Jingxian with a smile. "What? Is General Lu afraid of Zhang Qilan?" Lu Jingxian's expression changed. He stuck out his chest and said, "Who would be afraid of him? Prince, don't worry, I swear to defend Jiantian Cliff to the death." Mo Shuyao waved his hand and said, "What do you mean swear to the death? Don't forget that Jiantian Cliff is not the final goal. If we lose all of our men at Jiantian Cliff, how are we going to fight the later battles?" Chapter 560. Lu Jingxian was a little surprised and asked, "What does Prince have in mind?" Mo Shuyao thought for a while and said, "Zhang Qilan will definitely rush to Jiantianya with all his might. Let's not rush over there. No matter what, we are still faster than him. Let's add some obstacles to their path. Also, add a line of defense 20 li in front of Jiantianya. Even if Jiantianya cannot defend in the end, it will at least deplete half of their forces." "I understand." Lu Jingxian nodded. Mo Shuyao nodded with satisfaction and said, "Then Jiantianya will be handed over to you." Hearing this, Zhang Qilan was stunned. "Handed over to me? Then Prince," Mo Shuyao said with a smile that was not a smile, "I can't tell you." The journey of the East Army was not smooth. On the afternoon of the second day, the army met with the first line of defense set up by the enemy. However, Feng Jiao, who had set out earlier to open up the path, was nowhere to be seen. The enemy did not have many people blocking their path, less than 2,000 to 3,000 people. If it was on flat ground, an army of 100,000 would be able to trample them to death. However, at this time they were circling around the mountain path. It was as if one man could hold off 10,000 men. Zhang Qilan was so angry that he kept calling Lu Jingxian despicable and shameless. However, no matter how despicable and shameless the enemy was, they still had to fight. Zhang Qilan was not a brute who only knew how to shout and curse. He immediately sent out a group of people to sneak around the enemy's back and attack from the front and back. Even so, they wasted almost 6 to 8 hours in this place. By the time they met with 2 or 3 similar obstacles along the way, Zhang Qilan had already understood that Lu Jingxian was trying to delay them. Yet this was the kind of scheme that couldn't be broken. Even if they knew that Lu Jingxian was trying to delay them, they had no choice but to follow this path. If they wanted to take a detour, it would take even longer. The final goal of this act was not the Skystream Cliff, but a small town that was dozens of miles away from the Skystream Cliff. There were 40,000 soldiers in the small city, and Mo Xiuyao's Western Army's mission was to occupy the small city. Yi Li and Zhang Qilan's mission was to reinforce and destroy the Western Army. The mountain stream cliff was the most important place because both the Eastern and Western armies had to pass through here to reach the small city. If Mo Xiuyao had enough troops, he could naturally pass through Jiantianya and take the small city. However, he only had 50,000 Black Cloud cavalry and 40,000 Mahist army. On the other hand, the East Army had 10,000 Black Cloud cavalry and 150,000 Mahist army. The current commander of the small city could not be ignored. He was the Mahist army's commander of Jiangxia City, Yuan Pei, who was very good at defending cities. Thus, if Mo Xiuyao used all of his troops to attack the city, if he was unable to take down the small city in 3 days, the Western Army would be surrounded by the Mahist army. Thus, he could only leave a portion of his troops to Lu Jingxian to delay the reinforcements. However, this also reduced the strength of the attacking troops. Because of the ambushes along the way, the Eastern Army used a total of 5 days to reach the lower three heavens 20 li away from Jiantianya. Looking at the banners and cold swords on the hillside, Zhang Qilan laughed coldly and turned around to order them to set up camp. His subordinates were all eager to give it a try. The past few days of marching had made them all want to vent their frustrations. They all asked Zhang Qilan for permission to fight. Zhang Qilan waved his hand to suppress everyone's requests. The enemy had the geographical advantage. Attacking in broad daylight was the same as seeking death. What does Mr. Chu think? Zhang Qilan turned his head and asked Yi Li, who was sitting to the side. Everyone also stopped talking and looked at the white-clothed young master sitting to the side. Although many people in the army had seen Yi Li before, they were not familiar with her. Yi Li had changed into men's clothing and changed her appearance slightly. She also rarely spoke, so none of these generals recognized that this somewhat silent young master was actually their Princess Ding. Of course, this was also related to the fact that these generals were proud and did not like Yi Li, who had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Naturally, there were not many people who were willing to talk to her. It seems like General Lu wants to stop us outside Jiantianya. At this time, Prince Ding should have already led his troops to attack the city. Yi Li muttered. The people below could not help but scoff. Who didn't know how to say such words? Just by looking at the situation in front of them, they knew what the other party meant. However, Zhang Qilan said thoughtfully, Mr. Chu means Prince Ding is not at Jiantianya right now? If it's only Lu Jingxian. I don't think he has many troops. I might be able to break through Jiantianya in 3 days. Yi Li shook her head and said, if we break through Jiantianya in 3 days, how many casualties does the general intend to suffer? Jiantianya can be considered a natural stronghold. Naturally, it is easy to defend and difficult to attack. If we lose all our troops here, how are we going to reinforce General Yuan? One of the generals below could not help but say, but if we don't break through, how are we going to get there? If we want to take a detour, it will take at least 7 to 8 days. Also, if we walk from the south, we will have to cross mountains and rivers. By the time we get there, we might not even be able to fight. If we go from the north, it will be a large swamp. We won't be able to cross at all. Zhang Qilan looked at Yi Li and asked, what does Mr. Chu mean? Yi Li pointed at the map on the table and said, General Yuan is good at defending cities. Even Prince Ding may not be able to break through the city in a short amount of time. What I mean is, to wipe out all the troops at Jiantianya. Everyone was shocked. Zhang Qilan frowned and said, this will take time. What if we can't reinforce the city in time? Yi Li did not frown and said calmly, we can just take it back after it's broken. A deputy general hesitated and said, but once the city is broken, the exercise will be over. Yi Li said calmly, it will only be over if one side concedes defeat or both sides suffer great losses. Is it possible that the city is taken by the enemy during the battle and the reinforcements have to go back the way they came? Everyone was silent and seemed to be deep in thought. The tent was silent for a while. Zhang Qilan slapped the table and stood up saying, good. We'll do as Mr. Chu says. The success or failure of this mission will be handed over to Mr. Chu. Do you have a plan? Yili looked at Zhang Qilan with a smile and said slowly, I'm still thinking about it. The night on the battlefield was not peaceful. The moon was dark and the wind was strong. Killing and arson were common on the battlefield. Therefore, when Yili was woken up by the noise outside for the third time that night, she was not surprised. She got up and put on her clothes and cloak before walking out of the tent. Qin Feng immediately appeared at the door. Master. Yili frowned slightly and said, Why aren't you resting? Qin Feng said, Wei Lin has gone to rest. He'll come to replace me in 2 hours. This time Yili did not bring Zhuojing and Lin Han. Instead she brought Qin Feng and Wei Lin out. After all, Prince Ding and the king as well as all the generals in the city were not there. Zhuojing and Lin Han had been left behind to help Su Qingchen. Yili said, You all go rest. Just send 2 people to keep watch. Qin Feng shook his head and said, I'll go back to rest in a while. It won't affect tomorrow's work. Yili knew she could not persuade him, so she did not say anything more. She looked curiously at the place where the fire was shining and asked, Whose people are making trouble? Qin Feng held back his laughter and said, It's a few of General Zhang's subordinates. They seem to have agreed to attack the defending army at night. Each of them would hold on for 2 hours and then retreat regardless of the outcome. This is the 3rd wave. The defending army on the mountain probably won't be able to sleep tonight. Yili raised her eyebrows and looked at the place where the sound of fighting could be heard. She raised her eyebrows and smiled. Interesting. Is this their own idea? Qin Feng nodded and said, It seems that they talked to General Zhang after dinner. General Zhang probably agreed. Chapter 561. At dawn, a group of overly excited and hot-blooded youths were indeed dragged back by Zhang Qilan, their faces covered in dirt. Yili and Wei Lin, who came later to replace Qin Feng, waited until the sounds of fighting at the front had stopped. Only after another hour did they see the group of people return to the camp. The young generals who were originally in high spirits drooped their heads, as if they were vegetables that had been hit by frost. As soon as they entered the camp, they saw Yili smiling at them while looking at a carriage. The expressions of the young generals became even more awkward. They felt that the general had found such a young military advisor who they didn't know where he came from. He didn't know anything and only said a few useless words from time to time, but the general valued him so much. These young men were naturally unconvinced. They all thought that they were much better than this pretty boy. Now that they had lost so much face in front of him, their expressions naturally didn't look too good. Mr. Chu, you haven't rested yet? Zhang Qilan saw Yili and naturally went up to greet her. Yili smiled and said, General, you haven't rested either, right? You've worked hard, General. Are you all right? Zhang Qilan sighed and said, Fortunately, you're fine. He turned around and glared at everyone, then roared, Why aren't you going back to rest? Are you waiting to be punished? Hearing this, the young generals all scattered like birds and beasts. Seeing how everyone looked at Zhang Qilan as if he was a killing god, Yili couldn't help but laugh softly and say, General clearly has no intention of punishing them. Why are you purposely scaring them? Zhang Qilan sighed helplessly and said, The people who came out this time are all young brats. Not only have they never been on a proper battlefield, but they're still hot-blooded and charging forward. If they really went on the battlefield, who knows what would happen? It turned out that the first 2 waves of ambushes had caused the enemy to be flustered for a while. These brats got carried away and decided to take turns to fight until dawn. This way the enemy naturally couldn't sleep for the entire night, but their own people could take turns to rest. His idea was not bad, but he forgot to observe the surrounding positions and the situation of the enemy. Halfway through the 3rd sneak attack, Lu Jingxian sent 2 groups of soldiers and horses to quietly flank them from both sides. If it wasn't for Zhang Qilan leading the troops, even if they didn't arrive in time, they wouldn't be able to match the 4,000 to 5,000 troops that they brought. Even those 4 to 5 young generals would have died there. The battlefield had always been cruel and merciless. If one didn't come from an aristocratic family, there wouldn't be many captains in an army of millions. Out of a few thousand captains, there would at most be less than 100 who could become deputy generals. And out of these less than 100 deputy generals, there would at most be 2 or 3 generals. It wasn't that these people didn't have the potential to become generals. but that in the process of becoming generals, they had already been engulfed by the shame of the battlefield. Mr. Chu, please train these kids more in the future, Zhang Qilon said sincerely. He knew Princess Consort's abilities. Not to mention the elusive and invincible Qi Lin, who was personally trained by Princess Consort, Qin Feng Zhuojing, and the others by Princess Consort's side were all rising stars if they were placed in the military camp. From this, it could be seen that Princess Consort's methods of teaching people were ingenious. Yi Li smiled and said, General Zhang is a good general. In this era, it was rare to see a general who was so considerate of his subordinates. Zhang Qilon laughed brightly and said straightforwardly, these youths are slightly rash, but they are the future of the Mahist army. There will be a day when us old men will be too old to go onto the battlefield. In the future we will have to rely on them. Yi Li smiled and said, General is in the prime of his life, it is too early to say the word old. This one will remember what General has said. This was a promise. Zhang Qilon raised his hands in a bow and said, Thank you, young master. It is still early, young master should return to the tent to rest for a while. Many thanks for General's concern. The next day when the people of the Eastern Army found that the Western Army guarding the front was still full of energy, a group of youths couldn't help but explode. The tent became a noisy mess. Yi Li smiled as she sat in a corner of the tent and listened to the discussion of these youths. Zhang Qilon was annoyed by their noise and rolled his eyes. What are you all arguing about? The Jiantian cliff in front is only 20 li, and the guards from last night were tired by your noise. Don't tell me that Lu Jingxian won't transfer the guards from Jiantian cliff over? If you can't get past this obstacle, do you want to fly to Jiantian cliff from the sky? Everyone was silent for a while and looked at each other. General, doesn't that mean that we did all this work for free last night? Even if they launched sneak attacks every day as long as the other side took turns, unless they forcefully broke through the defensive line in front of them, there was nothing else they could do. What's more, they had almost suffered a great loss on the first night of the sneak attack. Zhang Qilon scratched the beard on his chin and said, saying that we did all this work for free is not entirely correct. You bunch of brats always get carried away with everything you do. It's fine if you harass them once or twice, but you are addicted to taking turns. Chapter 562. Before Yi Li could finish speaking, the youths who had been acting righteously all turned red in the face. Although they weren't convinced, they couldn't help but admit that strategist Chu was right. Half of the reason why they charged forward so bravely was because they knew this was a drill and not a real battlefield. If this was a real battlefield, would they still charge forward so recklessly? Or even if they continued to charge forward so bravely, what kind of consequences would they cause? Zhang Qilon knocked on the table and said, Fine, I'll take care of tonight's matters. Without my orders, no one is allowed to act rashly. Those who disobey will be executed. Although this wasn't a real battlefield, his orders were real military orders. Those who disobeyed military orders, regardless of whether it was a real battlefield or not, would be executed without mercy. He turned to look at Yi Li and said with a smile, Mr. Chu, I'll leave these immature brats to you. Yi Li smiled and said, It's my honor to have the general believe in me. Zhang Qilon nodded with satisfaction. He stood up and glanced at the group of young men who were still eager to make a move, and said in a deep voice, Mr. Chu's words represent this general's words. Those who disobey will be beheaded. Zhang Qilon led his older subordinates to deal with Lu Jingxian's men at the front. The group of young and aggressive generals were surrounded by Yi Li and couldn't move. The youths became more and more irritable as they listened to the soldiers entering and leaving the camp every day without a share of them. Finally, on the afternoon of the third day, they couldn't hold it in any longer and came to find Yi Li to argue. Outside Yi Li's temporary tent, Yi Li's smile was as warm as the spring breeze as she looked at the youths in front of her. She smiled and said, Do you have any objections? The leader said, We want to go to war. What right do you have to stop us from going to the battlefield? Yi Li leisurely played with the fan in her hand and said casually, Because I'm the strategist. Because General Zhang gave you to me to dispatch. Because I won't allow it, you can't go. This kind of arrogant answer was definitely a provocation to this group of young people. Everyone looked at Yi Li as if they wanted to immediately rush up and give her a good beating. Qin Feng and Wei Lin, who were standing behind Yi Li, calmly glanced at the youths in front of them. A cold glint flashed in their eyes. Yi Li looked at the young men in front of her and continued, You want to go to the battlefield? What's the point of you going to the battlefield? The generals under General Zhang's command have been fighting without you for the past 2 days, and there has never been a situation where General Zhang has to go personally to reinforce them. Yili retreated to the side and leisurely leaned against Qin Feng and Wei Lin, moving among the youths with ease. Rather than a group fight, it was more like two people playing with a group of crazy kittens. These youths were indeed not as good as their peers in the Mahist army, but compared to Qin Feng and Wei Lin, who came from Qilin and were the best among them, they were not enough. The youth who had just been kicked to the ground by Yili was still sitting on the ground and didn't get up. He didn't join the fight. It was because he stood outside the fight that he could see the gap between himself and Qin Feng and Wei Lin more clearly. He looked at Yili and finally drooped his proud head. Yili kicked him with interest and asked, "Why don't you try?" The youth sat on the ground and didn't get up. He shook his head and said, "I'm not an idiot. We can't beat them at all. Do you want to make a fool of yourself?" Yili nodded and said with a smile, "You are indeed not their match, but that's not important. They are not on the same path as you. It's best if your martial arts are strong, but if you can't, there's no need to compete with them. General Zhang may not be their match." The youth said with dissatisfaction, "Then why do you want them to fight?" Yili raised her eyebrows and said, "Because compared to you, General Zhang clearly has a smart brain. You don't have anything, but you think you have everything. I think your brains need to be fixed together with your bodies." The youth opened his eyes wide and glared fiercely at Yili, saying, "We're not stupid. They were the rising stars of the Mahist army. Who didn't praise them for having a bright future?" Yili nodded seriously and said, "You really aren't stupid. How can I describe your level of stupidity? Have you ever seen an idiot seeking death?" The youth's face turned red with anger. She was saying that they weren't even as stupid as idiots. Yili looked at the person in front of her with interest and couldn't help but smile. A young man in his early 20s whose emotions could rise and fall so easily. In this era where people matured early, it was quite rare. Seeing Yili's teasing smile, the youth couldn't help but fly into a rage out of humiliation. "What are you laughing at?" Yili coughed lightly and covered her mouth with her fan, saying, "Nothing, I just want to laugh." While the two were talking, Qin Feng and Wei Lin had already put down a group of children who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. No matter how they went easy on them, the difference in strength between the two sides was too great. Therefore, the originally well-dressed young generals all fell to the ground in a sorry state. Yili looked down at everyone with a smile and said, "How is it? Do you admit defeat now?" "We admit defeat." Although the young generals were still a little depressed, the way they looked at Yili and the other two was very different from before. In the military, the strong were king. Although these young people were arrogant, they still respected the strong. The fight just now also made them understand the difference in strength between them and their opponents. "But Mr. Chu, we can't always hide in the back and be protected by others, right?" Although they knew that they were inferior, they were now on the battlefield. They had to put away their thoughts and think about it later. Right now they had to solve the battle in front of them. Yili looked at them with a smile and asked, "You guys really want to fight?" Hearing this, everyone knew that there was hope. 6 or 7 pairs of eyes looked at Yili in unison. The anticipation and desire in their eyes made Yili feel a little pressured. Seeing this group of enthusiastic young people in front of her, Yili smiled faintly and said, "It's not impossible. Go back and choose 200 elites from your subordinates and wait for orders." "Mr. Chu, what do we need to do?" Yili said in a deep voice, "It's a secret. Remember, everything has to be done quietly. Do not attract anyone's attention, including General Zhang. The people who are discovered will stay behind to reflect." Young people all liked mysterious and exciting things. Hearing Yili say this, everyone became even more excited. Yili looked at them with a slight frown and said seriously, "Also, even though this is acting, the danger still exists. This mission can be said to be the most dangerous of the dangerous. I cannot guarantee that there will be no casualties. Do you understand?" "This subordinate understands," everyone said in unison. What Yili said was not a matter for them at all. How could there be no casualties on the battlefield? Yili nodded and said, "All right, go prepare. We will gather at the second watch period." "Yes. Wang Fei, these brats are too immature. Wang Fei, why do you care about them?" Wei Lin said with dissatisfaction. These brats had been rude to Wang Fei in the past few days. If they died 100 times in the Wang Fu, it wouldn't be enough. Yili smiled faintly and said, It's a group of young people and they're quite cute. Qin Feng and Wei Lin silently looked at each other. At the same time, they decided not to spread Wang Fei's evaluation. If the prince knew, these brats would die 100 times. It wasn't a long journey, but it took them 2 hours to reach the top. Yili turned to look at the young people under the moonlight. Their clothes were messy but their eyes were bright. She nodded in satisfaction. Although their clothes were torn by the rocks, branches and weeds on the mountain, and many people had scratches on their faces, no one was left behind. They also didn't make any big mistakes that would attract the attention of the enemy. It seemed that the Mahist army's daily training was very good. Because the entire mountain was guarded by the enemy, their group of more than 1,000 people was not a small number. They were even more careful after going up the mountain. They avoided the eyes and ears of the enemy along the way, and they only reached their destination at the 5th night watch period. When they reached their destination, before Yili could tell them to rest, a few figures flashed out from the shadows. Everyone was startled and quickly held their weapons. "Don't be nervous, we're on the same side." The person who came waved his hand and smiled. The 5th night watch period was the darkest time before dawn. Everyone couldn't see the person's face clearly and naturally didn't dare to let down their guard. Yili calmly said, "Feng-san." Feng Jiao slowly walked over and smiled. "I didn't think that you guys would be able to make it here. I thought that if you guys couldn't make it, we would have to do it ourselves." Only when he walked closer did everyone see clearly that the person who came was Feng Jiao. "General Feng, how come you're here?" Feng Jiao smiled and said, "I've been here since the beginning. Wasn't I waiting for you guys? Young Master Chu, it's been hard on you." Yili rolled her eyes and asked, "How is it?" Feng Jiao said, "Lu Jingxian plans to defend Jiantian Cliff to the death. Lu Jingxian has about 30,000 people under him and at most 2,000 Black Cloud cavalry. Jiantian Cliff was a strategic location, and the Black Cloud cavalry couldn't be used here. It would be a waste to leave too many behind." Feng Jiao looked at the group behind Yili and frowned. "Why are there so few people?" Yili said, "Do you think it's easy to bring people up here? These people are the most limited people. If we drag it out until dawn, we will definitely be discovered. Although we have covered it up a little, the other party may still discover traces of us after dawn." With a group of new recruits, the concealment along the way naturally wouldn't be too ingenious. If the other party's patrolling soldiers had sharp eyes, they would most likely discover traces of a large group of people walking along the way. Feng Jiao also knew that he was being too demanding. He looked at Yili and asked, "I only have 3,000 people here. What should we do?" Yili smiled and said, "There's nothing to do. Let's take this opportunity to set a fire behind their backs. If General Zhang grasps the opportunity well, he should be able to rush up." Feng Jiao nodded and said, "Let's do it like that." Yili turned around and looked at the people behind her and said, "Rest here for an hour and then set off." The young general behind her said, "Military advisor, we are not tired. We can move now." Yili glanced at him indifferently. "Who cares if you are tired or not? In a while, General Zhang and the others will be fighting. We should take advantage of the moment before dawn to make a move. After causing chaos, we will retreat before the sky turns bright." The young general who spoke rashly blushed and sat down to rest in embarrassment. Feng Jiao stood to the side and looked at the group of young fellows behind Yili with interest. He smiled and said, "It seems that young Master Chu also has a time when he can't mix well?" Feng Jiao's eyes naturally saw that this group of young generals wasn't completely convinced by Yili. Yili didn't even bother to roll her eyes. She walked to a big tree and sat down to rest. "There's no other way. I've let young Master Feng down." Sensing that Yili's mood wasn't very good, Feng Jiao touched his nose and consciously turned around to find a place to close his eyes and rest. In the temporary tent outside Jiantian Cliff, Lu Jingxian sat in a chair and closed his eyes to rest. The generals next to him all had angry expressions. There are repeated sneak attacks every night. Do they still want people to rest? Not to mention that Zhang Qilan's subordinates were very depressed these days. Lu Jinxian's side wasn't relaxed either. They had the advantage of being on the high ground. Basically, the eastern troops had to pay the price of at least 5 or 6 people to injure one of them. Moreover, Zhang Qilan definitely wouldn't fight them to the death here. It was fine during the day, but when night came, the other side wouldn't stop tormenting. At night they couldn't see. If they weren't careful, the other side could sneak up on them. Therefore, the soldiers stationed here couldn't help but be on high alert. After all, no one knew if the other side was just testing them or would really swarm them. After a few days, both sides couldn't help but get angry. Chapter 564. General, the prince sent a letter on horseback, someone reported from outside the tent. Lu Jingxian opened his eyes and scanned the rowdy crowd. He said in a deep voice, "Come in." A soldier came in and presented a letter with both hands. Lu Jingxian opened the letter and slowly frowned after reading it. The other generals changed their expressions and hurriedly asked, "General, what orders does the prince have?" LV Jingxian casually passed the letter to a deputy general sitting below him. The deputy general stilled when he saw it. He looked dazedly at Lu Jingxian and said, "The prince is reminding general to be careful of the princess consort?" The other people also passed the letter around. Lu Jingxian frowned and said, "Speaking of which, in the last few days, the princess consort has not appeared in the army at all." When the princess consort was mentioned, even though she was a woman, these generals who had fought on the battlefield still showed respect. It was not just because the princess consort had military talent that was different from other women, but also because the princess consort had done many things for the Mahist army in the last few years. For example, the promotion of soldiers, the payment of soldiers, the placement of wounded soldiers, and even the organization of the army. Many effective methods had been proposed and implemented by the princess consort. So in the eyes of these soldiers, Princess Ding was not as simple as a normal princess consort, but one of the true controllers of the Mahist army. For the prince to write a letter to remind her, this caused everyone to pay more attention to Princess Ding. But at this time, they did not know what Princess Ding was doing. At this time, Lu Jingxian found that he had overlooked an important person. It wasn't that LV Jingxian thought that Yi Li was better than Zhang Qilon when it came to commanding troops. It was just that Zhang Qilon had worked with him for more than 10 years, so they had a rough understanding of each other. But Princess Ding was an existence that they did not understand at all. The only understanding of Princess Ding was limited to the battle that she had defeated Genom of Gojoseon a few years ago. Of course, that battle was enough to make any general view her in a new light. There was a saying in the art of war, "Know thyself and know thy enemy to win 100 battles." For some reason, Lu Jingxian suddenly felt a little uneasy. Just as he was thinking about something with his head lowered, the sound of weapons and fighting could be heard from afar. Soon, a soldier came in and reported, "General, the enemy is attacking again. Fight back. Remind the soldiers at the front line not to lower their guard." LV Jingxian slapped the letter on the table. Then he stood up and walked out of the tent. Not far away from the Skystream cliff, Yi Li looked down at the place where the flames were faintly burning. This kind of drill was not as important to them as the new soldiers. Under the light of the fire, some of the soldiers were still fighting with swords and spears. Some had simply rolled on the ground and hugged each other to fight. Some even used tricks such as choking, biting ears, and so on. No wonder young Master Feng San, who always paid attention to his demeanor on the battlefield, was so happy that he laughed. Yi Li looked down calmly and said lightly, "At least they can be a little familiar with it. In the future they will not panic on the battlefield. The ones who die the quickest on the battlefield are always the new soldiers." Feng Jiao stopped laughing and nodded. He said, "Wang Fei is right. General Lu has returned." A strange howl came from the night sky. Feng Jiao's expression became serious as he said solemnly. Yi Li nodded and looked at the sky. She said, "It's late. Let's retreat." Feng Jiao frowned and said, "But General Zhang?" Yi Li said, "Lu Jingxian will probably call back at least half of his men. If General Zhang still can't attack, then we can't do anything. When General Lu's people arrive, we won't be able to leave. Let's go up the mountain." Feng Jiao was helpless. He knew that Yi Li was speaking the truth. He could only give the signal to retreat. The young soldiers who had been fighting excitedly were forcefully called back. They were all restless like little ponies. When Lu Jingxian rushed back to the main camp on Jiantian Cliff, the sky had already brightened. The originally neat and tidy camp now looked like it had been burned by fire and ravaged by bandits. Looking at the large groups of dead soldiers sitting in the center of the camp, LV Jingxian, who had not slept for the entire night, looked even worse. "Who's your general? How many people are there?" Lu Jingxian asked in a deep voice as he stared at a soldier of the East Army who was chatting among his own soldiers. The soldier stared blankly for a moment before quickly replying, "Reporting to the general, this lowly one has already died in battle." The dead could not speak. Lu Jingxian's face couldn't help but twist. He gave a cold snort and left. The soldier frowned with worry. His face was full of confusion. He didn't say anything to make General Lu angry, right? On the mountain slope 20 li away, there was a fierce battle for position. However, the defending army, which had suddenly lost half of its men, was gradually showing signs of decline. On Jiantian Cliff it was a different scene. The East Army would come and besiege them from time to time. When they were beaten back by the West Army, they would not continue to harass them. They would retreat and rest before coming back to continue the battle. If they were on the plains, this kind of provocation would be seeking their own deaths. However, on Jiantian Cliff, where the mountain was rugged and the path was rugged, sometimes there was no difference between 10,000 men and 3,000 men. By the time Lu Jingxian had a thorough understanding of the enemy's forces, there were less than 4,000 men after deducting those who had died in battle and stayed in his camp to eat and drink for free. It was too late for regrets. Because these 4,000 men were firmly blocking the main path leading to the outside reinforcements. Over 10,000 men could only watch as their own forces 20 li away were slowly wiped out by the enemy. The depressed Lu Jingxian swore to annihilate this group of people on Jiantian Cliff. As a result, a complicated battle for position began on Jiantian Cliff. There was only a small area on the main path leading out. Both sides were unable to mobilize their entire army. Thus, the West Army occupied the entrance. Before the reinforcements could leave the pass, they were suppressed by the East Army. The East Army occupied the entrance. In less than an hour, the West Army rushed up and continued the battle. Both sides suffered countless casualties. The most peculiar thing was that during the battle both sides would fight to the death and use all kinds of methods. However, once it was determined that someone had died, everyone would be good brothers. They would sit on the side and continue to watch their comrades kill each other. This battle continued until the afternoon of the same day. The small entrance had been fought over 4 or 5 times by both sides. Both sides had suffered heavy losses. Yi Li and Feng Jiao's original 4,000 men had less than 2,000 left. Lu Jingxian's side had also lost close to 3,000 men. However, if Zhang Qilan could not take down the enemy in front of them by tomorrow morning, all their efforts would be for naught. They would all be wiped out. Therefore, after seeing Zhang Qilan's signal, Yi Li and Feng Jiao couldn't help but let out a long sigh of relief. However, Lu Jingxian's face darkened. The pass in front of them had been broken. There was no meaning in staying at the entrance in front of them. Lu Jingxian snorted and returned to the camp with a dark face. Looking at the back of Lu Jingxian from afar, Feng Jiao sat on a large smooth rock and laughed. Yi Li sat on the side and glanced at him. What made young Master Feng laugh like this? Feng Jiao sat up and said, "What else could it be? Did Wang Fei not see Lu Jingxian's expression? Ah. That guy always boasted that he was the best commander of the Mahist army under the prince. He was only slightly convinced by Zhang Qilan. Right now General Zhang is still 20 li away. After fighting for an entire day he still doesn't know who his opponent is. Do you think his expression is good?" Yi Li helplessly shook her head and said, "We were lucky this time. If General Zhang was a few hours later. Young Master Feng, you and I would have become General Lu's captives." Feng Jiao rubbed his nose and complained, "Why didn't Wang Fei let Qilin participate in the battle?" Yi Li smiled at him and said, "This is a drill. If we use cheats in a drill we might as well act." Cheats? What was that? Chapter 565. By the time Zhang Qilan brought his army to meet up with Yi Li and Feng Jiao, it would be another tough battle. However, it was better than what they had expected. At the very least, they were at the top of the cliff and not being suppressed by someone from a higher ground. Furthermore, Lu Jingxian's 30,000 men had already lost more than half of their numbers. However, they had lost less than 10% of their own men. Thinking of this, Zhang Qilan couldn't help but want to laugh out loud. Outside a small city several kilometers away, Mo Shuyao sighed helplessly as he stood outside the camp and looked at the small city that was isolated and had its gates tightly shut. Yun Ting and Chen Yun beside him looked at the prince strangely, not understanding why the prince sighed. In the end, Yunting couldn't hold back his words and couldn't help but ask, "Your Highness, is there something troubling you?" Emo Xiuyao shook his head and said, "I'm afraid Lu Jingxian won't be able to hold on for much longer." Not knowing Yunting, even the usually calm Qin Yun didn't believe it. He frowned and said, "The cliff is a dangerous place. Even if General Zhang has 100,000 men, he won't be able to do anything. Why is Prince?" Emo Xiuyao handed the battle report to Qin Yun and said, "Ever since Zhang Qilon arrived, Li and Feng San have not appeared. I'm afraid that the two of them have taken a detour behind Lu Jingxian. If that's the case, Lu Jingxian's defense in the first 20 li of the cliff will be useless. Once the two armies reach the cliff, even if Zhang Qilon's 100,000 men can't do anything, they can take turns to grind Lu Jingxian's 10 to 20,000 men to death." Hearing Emo Xiuyao's words, Qin Yun and Yunting's expressions changed. Yunting said, "Prince, I'm willing to go and reinforce General Lu." Emo Xiuyao looked at him and said indifferently, "Reinforce? Where are we going to get reinforcements? What's more, even if I give you 10 or 20,000 men, what can they do in front of an army of 100,000? Yunting was speechless. Then what should we do?" Emo Xiuyao turned his gaze to the isolated city in front of them and said in a low voice, "Attack the city with full force. We must take down this city before Zhang Qilon's men arrive." Qin Yun and Yunting's expressions were solemn as they stood up and said, "This subordinate obeys." Although Emo Xiuyao said that he would attack the city with all his might, this small city was not that easy to take down. Yuan Pei was a veteran of the Mahist army and was especially good at defending cities. In a situation where Emo Xiuyao didn't have the advantage in numbers, as long as Yuan Pei didn't care about anything else and waited for reinforcements, Emo Xiuyao wouldn't be able to do anything to him. Even if Emo Xiuyao had 1,000 plans, Yuan Pei was as steady as a mountain and didn't care about anything. Even if Yunting and the others cursed at him every day, the people on the city walls didn't open the city gates and couldn't do anything about it. On the cliff of Jiantian, the two armies faced off for 4 to 5 days before they finally wiped out Lu Jingxian's 10,000 men. Lu Jingxian was personally captured by Zhang Qilon. The two of them had worked together for more than 10 years and had often fought with each other. Although he lost to Zhang Qilon this time, Lu Jingxian didn't feel ashamed. Seeing his subordinates completely annihilated, LV Jingxian, who was exhausted from the battle, threw away his weapon and said to Zhang Qilon, who was extremely proud of himself, "I lost." Zhang Qilon pulled him up with a face full of smiles and chuckled. "Victory and defeat are common in battle. Don't take it to heart." Lu Jingxian snorted softly and said, "You definitely couldn't have broken through my defenses so quickly. Where's Wang Fei?" The young generals watching stilled. The Prince Ding mansion still had a former Princess Wang Fei because she was unwilling to leave the Dechu state. Emo Xiuyao had ordered Leng Haoyu to protect her in secret. But in the minds of the Mahist army, there was only one Wang Fei right now. But how come they didn't know that the Wang Fei was in their army? Everyone's gaze looked at Zhang Qilon, who told him to be the main general. If even he didn't know the whereabouts of the Wang Fei, then no one else would. Zhang Qilon laughed dryly and looked at Yi Li, who had come with Feng Zhiyao. Lu Jingxian stilled and didn't recognize Yi Li. But he was very familiar with Qin Feng and Wei Lin, who were following behind Yi Li. It was clear who it was that both Qin Feng and Wei Lin were following at the same time. When he looked closely at Yi Li, who was standing next to Feng Zhiyao, he immediately felt that it was the Wang Fei. "This subordinate greets Wang Fei." Lu Jingxian went forward and bowed. Yi Li grimaced helplessly. Looking at the petrified crowd in front of her, she said, "General Lu, rise." Lu Jingxian raised his hands in a bow and said with a smile, "This one accepts defeat at Wang Fei's hands." Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "General overpraises." Yi Li just did her best. Lu Jingxian didn't care. In any case, he definitely wouldn't admit that he had lost to Zhang Qilon, at least not to his face. This one doesn't have anything else to do, so this one will take his people and leave first. "I wish Wang Fei a safe journey." Yi Li nodded and said, "Many thanks for General's auspicious words." Seeing Lu Jingxian leave confidently with the soldiers who had been declared dead, the remaining people were silent. Was it really all right to wish the main general of the enemy a safe journey? After passing through Jiantian Cliff, even though the road behind them wasn't flat, it was still very calm. They didn't dare to delay at all. The group of people sprinted towards the isolated city to help Yuan Pei. At this time on the walls of the small isolated city, Mo Shuyao was dressed in white. He wasn't even wearing his battle robes. He looked at the old General Yuan Pei and said with a smile, "Old General, this time I won." The white-haired General Yuan Pei looked at the man in front of him whose hair was as white as snow but still as proud as the wind. A thread of relief and joy flashed through his eyes. He nodded and said, "It is true that Prince has won. This old man admits defeat." In terms of military strength, Mo Shuyao was only slightly better than Yuan Pei. Attacking a city was much harder than defending it. Back then Shiling's army of more than 100,000 had not been able to break through a small city in Jiangxia. Now Prince Ding had broken through in a few short days. This was his ability. Yuan Pei was not a person who refused to admit defeat because of old age. He felt very gratified that the Ding King's household had a successor. If this was a real battlefield, I would not have been able to take the city so easily. This isolated city was truly isolated because it was a newly built city. There hadn't even been time for residents to move in. And on a battlefield there wouldn't be a city that had basically nothing. Yuan Pei laughed loudly and said, "Many thanks to Prince. But if this was a real battlefield, Prince wouldn't have only brought a few tens of thousands of troops to attack a city, right?" The two looked at each other and smiled. Clearly they were in a good mood. Reporting to Prince, "There are troops coming this way." A soldier on the city wall rushed over to report. "Oh." Mo Shuyao looked over. In the distance there was indeed the sound of hooves and dust rising. In less than an hour Yili, Feng Jiao and Zhang Qilon had already led their troops to the city. Mo Shuyao looked around and saw at least 80 to 90,000 troops. He couldn't help but praise, to be able to wipe out Lu Jinxian's troops with less than 20,000 losses. That's not bad. Looking down at the people below, he smiled faintly and said, "General Zhang Feng Sanli, you've come too late." Feng Jiao gritted his teeth in regret. Looking at the situation, if they had come 2 to 4 hours earlier, the situation would have been very different. Unfortunately, on the battlefield, the difference of half an hour could often completely change the outcome of a battle. "Princess,"